A dragon has its mouth open above me, and I can see all the way down its throat. The ground under my knees is cracked black stone. The heat coming off its teeth is drying my eyes. I am about to be eaten. It is red. The deep red of an iron bar left too long in a forge. It is longer than the street I grew up on, and one claw rests on my leg, not pressing, just enough to make running a joke. My name is Kaito. Kaito Mori. 22 years old, 3 days in this world, and I am going to end as a snack on a plane of ash because a king thought I was funny. It starts 3 days ago. I am asleep in my own bed. Then there is light coming up through a floor, an incense and a circle burned into marble, and a hall full of priests looking very pleased with themselves. They call it the summoning of the hero. They do it once every 100 years, they tell me. The last one carried a sword that cut a river in half. They look at me and wait for something like that to start. Then the window opens in front of my eyes. Pale letters hanging in the air, and the priests can read them too, because the system likes an audience. Class assigned. Croupier. Weapon skill, none. Magic, none. Body, ordinary. One passive skill, and the name of it fills the whole hall. Absolute debt. Any wager lost is collected by the system, by force, from the loser, without exception. The hall goes quiet for one breath. Then a knight laughs, and once one man laughs, the rest are allowed to. The sound comes off the marble and hits me from every side at once. King of the humans is named Aldrich. He has a soft face and clean hands, and he does not laugh. He looks at me the way you look at a crate delivered to the wrong address. He asks the priests whether the summoning can be run again. They tell him no, not for another 100 years. So he asks what a croupier is, and a scribe explains that it is a man who runs the games in a gambling house. Aldrich thinks about that for a long moment. Then he tells his court that the gods have sent his kingdom a dealer of cards, and that he will send the gods their gift back, with interest. They put me in a cart with 2 soldiers, and drive me east for 2 days, past the last farm, past the last well, to a boundary stone with a burned crown carved into it. Past that stone the ground turns black, and the sky turns the color of old smoke. The Ashlands, the continent of the ancient dragons. Nothing human that walks in there has ever walked back out. The older soldier is almost kind about it. He gives me a water skin and says the dragons usually make it quick. Then they turn the cart and I can still hear them laughing when they are out of sight. I walk for a day and a half. I drink the water. I find no plant, no animal, nothing but black rock and gray drifts of ash that come up over the top of your boots. And now, there is a mouth over me the size of a barn door, and I have learned one thing about myself. I do not beg. My hands go somewhere else instead. They go digging through my coat, because the system has given me something. When the class lands, a roll of leather comes with it, sitting inside my coat like it has always lived there. A dealer's kit, deck of cards, 2 dice cut from white bone, a small bag of blank wooden discs, and 3 wooden cups, the little ones, with a ball of hard black wood that fits underneath. The dragon breathes in. I set the 3 cups down on the flat rock in front of my knees. It is the only clean stone within reach, and I put them there in a neat row. 1, 2, 3. The mouth stops, not out of mercy, out of surprise. The food is doing something strange with its hands, and the mouth waits to see what the food thinks it is doing. I hold the black ball up so it can see it. My voice comes out level, which surprises me more than it surprises the dragon. I say, before you eat me, play 1 round with me. The dragon answers, I am not ready for that. Its voice comes up through the stone as much as out of its throat, and it says, in my own language, that food does not make offers. I make the offer anyway because there is nothing else in my pockets. I say, I put this ball under 1 cup. I move the cups. You point at one. If you are right, you eat me, and it costs you nothing at all. And if you are wrong, I say, you give me 1 scale. 1. That loose gold one at the edge of your shoulder, the one that is already lifting away from the skin. The claw shifts on my leg. The eye above me is the size of a dinner plate and gold all the way through, and it has come off my throat. It is on the cups now. Then it says, the thing that saves my life. And it says it like the dullest fact in the world. It says, I have been alive for 1100 years, and nothing new has happened in 400 of them. I know that voice. I have heard it from men at a table at 4 in the morning, men with money and nothing to spend it on. It is the sound of a creature that would pay anything to be surprised, so I do not talk. Talking is how you lose a table. I put the ball under the middle cup where it can watch me do it, and then I move the cups on the rock. Slow at first, so it can follow. Left over middle, middle over right, back again. My hands have done this before in a basement card room behind a station for 2 years for wages. I took that job at 19 because I wanted to see the machine from the inside. My father fed our house to a machine like it. He kept saying he was 1 good night away. He was never 1 good night away. So I learned the trade of the other side of the table. Deal, pay, take, smile. Keep the drinks coming. And the first thing they teach you is that the house does not need to cheat because the house does not need to. I stop. 3 cups, 1 ball. I look up at a mouth that could take my head off with a yawn, and I say, pick. The claw lifts off my leg. 1 talon, longer than my arm, comes down and touches the cup on the left. The talon is trembling very slightly. 1100 years old, and it is excited. I lift the left cup. Nothing under it. I lift the middle cup, and the black ball sits there, small and stupid and worth exactly one human life. Dragon goes absolutely still. Then it makes a sound I do not have a word for, a low grinding in its chest, and I understand that I am looking at a creature which has just discovered it can be beaten. It says, again. I say, first you pay me the scale. And that is when it decides to eat me instead. Simple, clean, no argument. The head comes down and the jaw opens and the wind of it puts ash in my mouth. Then a window opens in the air between us, wide enough that both of us can read it, and the letters in it are not pale blue this time. They are red. You're settled. Loser, the red drake Varos of the Cinder Reach. Stake, 1 gold scale, shoulder plate, collection by force under absolute debt. The scale rips itself off him. I hear it come away, a wet tearing crack, and it hangs in the air a moment before it drops into the ash at my knees, the size of a dinner plate, still warm. The dragon screams, a sound like a mountain being opened. He rears up and beats his wings, and the ash goes up in a wall, and I am flat on my face with my arms over my head, waiting to be cooked. Nothing cooks me. When I get my head up, he is standing there with blood running down his shoulder, staring at the gold plate lying in front of me, and his eyes are enormous. He says, "What have you done to me?" And I say the truest thing I have said all week. I say, nothing. You made a bet and you lost it. That is all a bet is. My hands are shaking so hard I have to put them under my knees. Inside my chest, something has gone very quiet and very cold, and it is thinking, this class is not garbage. This class is a weapon. System will not let anyone walk away from a table with me. Not a knight, not a king, not a thing the size of a warehouse. If they wager it and lose it, the system takes it out of them. Varos, because that is his name now, lowers his head until his eye is level with mine. He does not eat me. He asks how many scales he needs to win it back. There it is. I have watched that exact face on a man in a cheap suit at 3 in the morning. The wound does not matter to him. What matters is that the gold is on my side of the rock. I tell him the price of the next round, and I keep my voice bored while I say it, because bored is what a house sounds like. 1 round. If he wins, he takes his scale back and I go into his mouth. If he loses, he pays 2. He agrees before I finish the sentence. He does not haggle. He has more gold under his mountain than the human kingdom has ever minted, and he has 400 years of nothing to spend it on. I move the cups. He picks the right one. He actually picks it, and I lift the cup, and there sits the little black ball, and Varos makes a noise like a landslide learning to be happy. Push the scale back across the rock to him with both hands. It weighs as much as a full bucket. He takes it back and holds it against his shoulder like a man patting his own wallet. That is when I know I am going to live. Not because he won, because of what his face does when he wins. He needed that. He has needed it for 4 centuries, and nobody ever told him what it was. He says, again. I say, the price has gone up. He says the word again like he did not hear me, and now there is heat coming off him and the rock under my knees is getting warm. So I tell him the new stake, the scale again, and a horn with it. The left one, the short crooked one, the one he is always turning to keep out of my sight. He goes quiet. He tells me a horn is not gold. A horn is his. I tell him that is the whole point of a stake, and that if the thing you put on the table costs you nothing, then winning it back will feel like nothing. He thinks about that for the length of 3 breaths. Then his head goes down, and he says one word, deal. And the window opens by itself. Pale letters, contract logged, and neither of us had to sign anything. I move the cups. I am not cheating. I want that clear right now, because a straight deal is the only thing I have to sell at this table. My hands are fast, and his eyes are 1,000 years old, and used to watching things the size of horses. He picks the middle. The ball is under the left. The red window opens between us, and the letters say collection by force, and the scale tears off him again, and then the horn comes off his skull with a crack I hear in my teeth. It falls in the ash beside the scale. Curved, black, longer than my leg, and the stump on his head is already smoking over. He does not scream this time. He stands there breathing. And Varos lifts his head and speaks quietly, for a mountain. He says, when can we do this again? Every man who ever stood behind a table waits his whole working life for a customer to ask him that. I am 3 days into this world, and the one asking me is the size of a warehouse. I look up at a sky the color of an old coin, and I do the arithmetic right there on my knees in the ash. He is not angry, he is hooked, and there is a whole continent of creatures exactly like him. I tell him the house is closed for today. He asks what a house is. I say it is the place where the games are, and that a house has hours, and that a game you can have at any moment is a game nobody wants. I am making that up as I say it. It is also completely true. Half of my old trade was making men wait for a table so they would sit down hungry. He asks when it opens. I say tomorrow, when the sun is over the ridge, and that he may bring anyone he likes, and that anyone who comes must bring gold, because the house does not lend. He rises up on his back legs and goes, and the wind of it knocks me over twice before he is even off the ground. Then the sky is empty, and I am alone with a gold scale and a black horn. I am sick in the ash, properly sick, on my hands and knees, shaking so hard my elbows will not lock. That is the price of the last 10 minutes, and I pay it in full. When I am finished, I sit up and I count what I own. 1 gold scale, the width of a dinner plate, 1 dragon horn, 3 cups, 1 ball, 1 deck, 2 dice, and a bag of blank wooden discs. I know what the scale is worth because I asked a soldier in the cart what things cost here. A laborer in the human capital earns 2 silver a month. This scale would buy that man 40 years of bread. 40 years of bread, and it fell off a shoulder like a scab, and its owner did not care that it was gone. He cared that he lost it. That is the whole business. Right there, and it took me 1 afternoon to find it. I sleep in a crack in the rock with the horn pulled over me like a roof. I do not sleep well. Every hour I wake up and put my hand on the scale to check that the day happened. In the morning I go to work, because that is what I have instead of a plan. I find a flat slab of black stone the size of a wagon bed, waist high, with the top worn smooth by the wind. I find a seam of soft white rock in a gully and break off a fistful of it. It draws on the black stone like chalk on a board. My hands are still shaking. I draw anyway. I draw a line down the middle. On the left, I draw 3 cups. On the right, I draw 6 squares in 2 rows, and I number them with dots because I do not know if dragons read. Under the squares, I draw a small circle, and inside the circle, I write nothing at all because that circle is the house, and the house does not have to explain itself. Then I stand back and look at what I have made, and I laugh out loud on an empty plain of ash. It is a table, a flat rock with chalk on it, in the middle of the deadliest country in the world, and it is a table. The sun comes over the ridge, and the ash starts to move, not wind, wing beats. I look up, and there are 3 of them coming in low over the black ridge, and the one in front is missing a horn. Aros lands the way a warehouse would land. Behind him comes a green one, thin and long, with a face like a knife. Behind that comes something gray and enormous that lands without a sound. They all 3 look at the flat rock with the chalk lines on it. Then they look at me, a soft human standing at the middle of it, with 3 wooden cups in my hands. The green one says, "This is the thing." Veros says, "This is the thing." The green one says, "It looks like a rock with scratches on it." Vieros says, "Put your gold down and say that again in an hour." I clear my throat. I have run a table for drunks and for men who own restaurants, but I have never opened for a customer that could sneeze me into paste, so I keep the speech short. I say, "Welcome. The house is open. There are 2 games today and there will be more later. Every stake is gold or something you value, and every stake is paid the moment it is lost, by the system, not by me." The gray one speaks for the first time, and its voice is old and dry like paper tearing. It asks what I take for myself. Here is the moment I decide what kind of house this is going to be. So I tell them the truth, plainly, on the first morning, in front of all 3 of them. I say, on every wager the house keeps a small slice. Not most. A slice. On the cup game I pay you 2 for 1 when you win, but the ball is under 1 cup in 3, so the slice is mine and it is always mine. The green one works it out faster than I like. He says, "Then over a long night you win." I say, "Yes. Over a long night the house wins. It is not a secret, and I will never pretend otherwise." "Then why," says the gray one, "would anyone sit down?" I look at 1100 years of boredom standing in a row in front of me, and I give the only honest answer there is. I say, because for the next 4 hours, you will not know what happens next. Nobody says anything. Then Varos steps forward and puts a scale down on the rock, and the sound it makes is the sound of my whole life turning over. The first session of the first gambling house in the history of this world runs from sunup to the middle of the afternoon, and it nearly kills me twice. Not from teeth. From the weight. Every time one of them loses, the system takes the stake and drops it on my side of the rock, and gold is heavy in a way nobody warns you about. Varos loses 9 scales in the first hour. The green one is called Sereth, thin as a whip, and he loses 4, and every single time he says the loss was a trick of the light. Gray one does not play. She stands back from the rock with her wings folded, and she watches my hands, and she watches the pile, and she watches the other 2 far more than she watches me. Her name is Osara. When she finally speaks, it is to ask how old I am. I tell her 22. She says she has scales older than my whole bloodline, and goes back to watching. By noon, there are 19 scales in the ash beside my knee, and I cannot lift the pile. I can barely lift a third of it. I am the richest man on the continent, and I am also stuck to 1 rock. That is the first real problem of the business, and it is a stupid one, and it is the kind that kills a shop inside a year. I have income and no way to hold it, move it, or count it. So I stop the game. Sereth objects loudly. I tell him the house closes when the dealer says it closes, and I sit down on the black rock in front of all 3 of them to think. The answer is in my coat. The little bag of blank wooden discs, 30 of them, plain as buttons. When I take one out and think a number at it, the system writes the number into the wood. The face of the disc goes pale, and a line of letters runs around the rim. House token. Value, 1 gold scale, issued by the house, redeemable at the house, on demand, in full. I sit there with a warm wooden button in my palm, and I understand what has just been put in my hand. Not a toy. A currency, backed by the same system that tears scales off shoulders. I build the ladder right there in the ash. 1 white token is 1 scale. 1 red token is 10 scales. 1 black token is 100 scales. 1 gold token is 1,000. Then I explain it to 3 dragons, and it takes an hour, and it is the hardest hour of my life so far. Varos keeps trying to bite a token to find out whether it is really gold. I keep the rules simple. You bring gold to the door, you hand it in, you get tokens, you play with tokens. When you leave, you hand the tokens back and take gold out at the same rate always. Sareth asks why he should give up real gold for a piece of wood. So I do the thing my old floor manager taught me, which is never to argue with a customer, only to demonstrate. I hand him one white token. I ask him to hand it back. When he does, I count one scale out of my pile into the ash in front of him, and he stares at it like a man watching a card trick. Then I take the scale back and put the token in his claw again, and tell him he may hold it as long as he likes. He holds it. He turns it over. He does not give it back. Done. Osara sees the whole thing land, and she is the only one who does. She says quietly that I have just taught 2 dragons to carry their hoards around in their teeth. I tell her yes. I do not tell her the rest. From now on, nobody has to watch their gold leave, and losing a wooden button hurts far less than watching a scale rip off your arm. That is the oldest trick in my trade, and I feel a small cold thing in my chest when I use it, and I use it anyway, because the ash storms are coming and I need a roof. The storms come every 4th day. Varos tells me while I am counting. He says the wind picks the ground up and puts it down somewhere else, and that soft things do not last out in it. Look at my flat rock, which will be under a drift by morning. Then I look at the ridge behind it, and I say, then we are going to build a house. Sareth says dragons do not build. I say fine. Then the game stops for a month while I build it alone with these 2 hands, and Sareth goes quiet for the first time all day. There it is again. The lever. Not their greed and not their pride. Their boredom. Anything that threatens to take the new thing away makes them agreeable in a hurry. So I put 3 ancient monsters to work before sundown. I stand on the rock and I point and I give orders like a foreman on a site. And the strangest afternoon of my life begins. Varos flies west to the edge of the human forest and comes back with an armful of pine trunks, roots and all, and drops them from a great height because he does not know another way to set a thing down. Sareth cuts black stone with his claws the way I tear bread, and Osara stands over the cuts and breathes on them until the edges run soft and weld together into one piece. I show them the shape. A long hall, low, with its back wall cut into the ridge so the wind has less to grab. A doorway wide enough that a full-grown dragon can put his head and both shoulders inside, because that is the design problem, and it took me an hour of watching to see it. They cannot come in, so the house gets a long open front, and every table sits just inside the line of the roof. The players stay out in the ash with their heads under cover, and the dealer stands inside, dry and warm, and every one of them is certain that he is the one with the good seat. By dark, there is a wall. By the next dark, there is a roof of pine and slabs, held down with pitch that Osara cooks out of the trunks with 2 breaths and a great deal of complaining. I sleep inside a building for the first time in 5 days. I lie there listening to the wind take the plane apart outside, and I laugh in the dark until my ribs hurt. In the morning, I take the white chalk stone and cut the rules into the black wall beside the door, deep, so the wind cannot lift them off. 5 of them. I read each one aloud as I cut it. Every stake is named before the cards move, and named out loud, so the system hears it and writes it down. 2. The house pays what it owes in full the same hour, or the house is finished. That rule is for me, not for them. 3. No fire, no claw, no breath inside the doorway. Whatever you break, you pay for it 3 times its worth, and you pay before you play again. Sareth looks up at my new roof, then at his own claws, and says nothing at all. 4. The house never lends. If you have nothing left, you go home and you come back when you have something. Varos asks what happens if he is very sure about the next hand. I say, then you go home and come back sure tomorrow. 5, and I cut this one deepest, is that no living thing is ever a stake in this house. Not a slave, not a servant, not a wife, not a child, not a prisoner. Gold, land, metal, name. Never a life. Sareth reads it and asks why, and he asks it honestly, and that is worse. I tell him a house that takes people stops being a house and turns into a slaughter yard, and I did not build a slaughter yard. Osara reads it twice. Then she looks at me a long moment and says that in 800 years she has never heard a human tell dragons what may not be eaten, and go on breathing afterwards. I tell her I made that rule for myself, not for her. I need one wall in this place that I will not move for money, or every other wall in it comes down inside a year. She does not answer. She walks to the end of the wall and reads the 5 rules again from the top, slowly, and I go back to counting scales. Word gets out on the 3rd day, and not the way I expected. I thought Varos would boast. Instead, the first stranger comes because of the horn. Varos has been flying around a continent with a stump on his skull, and every dragon who sees it asks who took it, and he cannot say a warrior did because no warrior did. He has to say a human took it off him with 3 cups and a ball. Then he has to say it again, and every telling drags one more curious monster east across the ash. By the end of the first week, there are 11 of them at the rock. By the end of the second, there are 26, and I can no longer run every table with 1 pair of hands. The gold problem gets worse in the good way. 240 scales stacked in the back room like roof tiles, a dozen horns, and a heap of arm rings the size of cartwheels. 30 blank discs will not run a room with 26 players in it. So the pine offcuts off my own roof go under a knife, and I sit up half of every night cutting buttons, and the system writes a value into each one the moment it is smooth. There is also a problem I did not plan for, and it nearly finishes the business in the third week. I run out of food. I have been eating the last of the soldier's bread and a sack of hard biscuit that Varos brought back with the pine without knowing what it was. On the 20th day, there is nothing left. Nothing grows in the ashlands. No grass, no beetles, no water except what drips from the rock and tastes of iron. Dragons do not eat often. They have simply forgotten that other things must. So I stand at the door with my hands shaking from hunger and explain to a creature 100 feet long that his dealer is going to die with an empty stomach in about 6 days. Varus does not understand at first. Then he does, and his face is almost funny. He asks how often a human must eat. I say 3 times a day. He asks for how long. I say until it dies. He is genuinely appalled. He says that sounds like a defect. I tell him it is a defect, and that it is shared by every creature on this continent except the ones with wings. Then I do what I should have done first. I turn the problem into a price. I tell him the house will pay 1 white token for every sack of grain set down at my door. 1 white token is 1 gold scale. 1 scale at the human border would buy a wagon of grain and then buy the wagon. I am offering a robbery, and I am offering it because I need it this week. Varos is in the air before I finish the sentence. Sareth goes after him, because he cannot bear a thing where tokens are handed out and he is not there. That is competition, and I did not even have to build it. Come back that night with 11 sacks of grain, 4 barrels of salt fish, a wheel of hard cheese the size of my table, 6 live goats, and a farmer. I have to explain at some length that the farmer is not part of the delivery and must go home immediately, and I give the man 2 silver out of my own pocket and apologize for his week. He does not say anything at all. He stares at a human standing in the door of a stone hall giving orders to a red drake, and he is still staring while Sareth lifts him off the ground. That man goes home and tells his village. The village tells the road tells the towns. My name is moving west without me tonight, and a name always reaches a king in the end. For now, I have food and a roof and 26 regular customers and a wall with 5 rules on it. I have also stopped being afraid. Out here, that is a far more dangerous condition than fear. So I start building real games. Cups and a ball is a street trick. It will hold a bored dragon for a month, and then the bored dragon will notice that a street trick is all it ever was. I build a card table, 4 flat stones, a slab, and a cloth of stitched goat hide stretched over the top. I teach them a simple 3-card game, and I teach it badly on purpose, 1 rule at a time, because that is the trade. You never hand a new player the whole game. You give him 1 rule, let him win with it, then give him the next, and every rule feels like something he worked out himself. The 4th night, 7 dragons have their heads under my roof, arguing about whether a red 3 beats a black 7, and 1 gray ancient stands at the back of them all, watching me work. Asara has not put down a single scale. Not one in 3 weeks. She comes every day, she stands in the same spot, and on the 4th night of the card table, she finally opens her mouth. She says, "You are not doing what they think you are doing. They believe you have given them a new toy. You are teaching a race of hoarders that a hoard is a thing that can move." I say, "That is all money is." She says, "Gold has never been money here. Gold is the floor we sleep on. You have picked the floor up and put wheels under it, and not one of them can see it yet." I have no clever answer for that. She is right. She saw it in 3 weeks, and she is the only one on this continent who has. So I tell her the truth, which is that I need the wheels, or I starve. She says, "I know. That is why I have not stopped you." Then she says, "Be careful what you teach us. We remember everything, and we never do anything small." I say nothing back. It lands somewhere under my ribs and stays there, and she turns and walks out into the ash without waiting for me to find anything to put against it. That night, I lie on my straw and run the numbers instead of sleeping, because numbers are the only thing that has ever calmed me down. 26 players, 19 of them come more than once a week. On an ordinary night, the house takes between 4 and 9 scales after paying out every winner in full and on the hour. At 9 scales a night, I could buy the town I was born in. At 9 scales a night, in a country where nobody sells anything, I cannot buy a hot bath, a doctor, or a way home. That is the wall I keep walking into. The priest said the summoning runs once a century. There is no ticket to buy. All this gold is a stack of very pretty roof tiles. So I decide, lying there in the dark, that if I cannot buy my way out, I will buy my way up. Enough gold and enough leverage, and one day a king will have to sit at my table and speak to me like a man. I think about Aldrich's clean hands and his soft face and the way he asked whether the summoning could be run again, and I promise myself out loud in an empty stone hall that he will pay for that card. Not in blood, in money, in front of witnesses, at a table where everyone can watch it happen. That is the debt I write down that night, and I keep it in my head like a receipt in a coat pocket. In the morning, the storm has passed and the plain is flat and clean, and there is a shape sitting on the ridge above my house, and it is not one I know. I have never seen that color out here, and it is nothing like Varos or Sareth. Black and blue at once, the color of a bruise, long in the jaw, with eyes like two coins held up against a lamp. She has her eyes on the wall and not on the door. She reads it top to bottom, slowly, and then she reads it again from the top, and I can tell she came here already angry. Then she comes down off the ridge and lands close enough to put ash over my boots, and she says, in a voice like cold water, that I have ruined her nephew and that she has come to shut me down. Her name is Silvara, and she does not tell me that for a while. What she tells me first is a number, and the number is 4,000. 4,000 gold scales. That is what her sister's son has lost in my house across 9 visits, and she has the count exact because she is the one who keeps the ledger of her line. The nephew is called Mirath. Young, by their measure, which means about 200 years. Silver blue, quick, laughs too loud, and I have watched him lose at my table like a man falling downstairs. Silvara stands in front of my door and tells me she is going to take the roof off my house and put me under it. She says it the way you would say you are going to move a chair. Do not run. Running is what she wants. Instead, I do the only thing that has ever worked on anything larger than me, which is to answer with numbers and keep my voice flat. I say, 4,060. Not 4,000. He lost 60 more on his last night at the card table, on a hand he should have folded. If you are going to be angry at me, be angry with the right figure. That stops her. She is not impressed. She simply was not expecting the number to come back at her sharper than she threw it. She says the game is a trick. I tell her it is not a trick. It is a price. And there is a difference. And I will show her the whole thing right now in daylight with nothing hidden. Bring the cups out to the flat rock. I show her the ball. I let her watch my hands as slowly as she wants. Then, I tell her the shape of the thing, out loud, the way I told Osara on the first morning. I say, the ball sits under 1 cup in 3. When you win, I pay you 2. So over a long night of even bets, the house keeps a slice of everything that crosses the rock. That slice is not luck. That slice is the business. She says, so you always win. I say no. Tonight, anyone can beat me. Over 100 nights, nobody does. Every player who sits down is betting that he is a short night, and I am betting that he is 100. Silvara is quiet for a moment, and when she speaks again, her voice has changed. She says, and you tell them this. I say, it is cut into the wall. Rule 1. Everything is named out loud before the cards move. She turns and reads the wall again. I watch her read Rule 5 twice, the one about living stakes, and something goes across her face that I cannot name yet. She says, give the boy his 4,000 back. I say no, and my heart is going like a hammer, and my voice comes out level, and I have never been prouder of anything in my life. I tell her why. I say if I give it back, then every dragon who ever loses in my house comes to my door with an ant. The house pays what it owes and keeps what it wins. There is no third door. She asks what happens if she simply takes it. All of it. Every scale in my back room, right now, with her claws. And this is the moment the whole business either exists or does not, so I answer honestly. I say, you take it, and nothing stops you. The system only protects a wager. Outside a wager, I am meat with a nice coat. But, I say, then the tables close, and the only new thing that has happened on this continent in 400 years is gone. And every dragon who has been sleeping properly for the first time in a century will know exactly whose claws did it. She looks at me for a long time. Then she says quietly, that I am a very small creature with a very good mouth. She does not take the gold. Instead, she makes me an offer, and the offer is so old and so stupid and so human that I almost laugh out loud in her face. She says, I will play you. 1 night. If I finish ahead, you close this place and return every scale you have taken from my line. If I finish behind, I will pay whatever the night cost me and never speak against this house again. Warn her, I want it said in front of witnesses so nobody can ever tell me she did not hear it. I warn her 3 separate times in front of Varos and Sareth and 2 others who have drifted in to watch. I tell her that everyone who sits down believing they can beat the shape of the thing loses, and that the ones who lose worst are always the clever ones, because the clever ones can talk themselves into one more. She says she has lived 940 years and has never once been talked into anything. Then she puts a claw down on the rock and asks how much a night costs. We open at dusk. I have never had a night like this one, and I have had some nights. She starts on the cups and wins 4 in a row. 4. On a game where she should win 1 in 3. The ash outside my door goes very quiet, and Varos makes a noise like a kettle. She takes 80 scales off me in the first hour, and she does not gloat. That is what frightens me. She stacks her tokens in a neat line, and she watches my hands, and she says almost nothing. By the second hour, she is 110 ahead, and I am running the arithmetic and telling myself the same thing I used to tell the pit boss at 4 in the morning. The night is long. Let the night be long. Then she moves to the card table, because she has worked out that the cups are thin and the cards have more room in them. She is right. She is right about everything, and that is the problem. She learns the 3-card game in 11 hands. By the 20th, she has stopped asking questions. By the 40th, she is playing better than Sareth, who has been coming here for a month. Sareth cannot leave that alone. He says, from the back of the crowd, that the light in my hall is bad and that anybody looks clever when the lamps are behind the dealer. Silvara does not turn her head. She says, then come and put your face in the good light. And she moves over on the rock, and 40 heads at my door turn to look at him. He has to come. He has told this room for a month that every scale he ever lost in here was the lamps, and now the lamps are being handed to him in front of every one of them. He lasts 9 hands. She takes his last 4 scales on the 9th and pushes them back across the hide to him with one claw, without being asked, which is far worse than keeping them. Sareth looks at the 4 scales for a long moment. Then he says, loud enough for the whole door, that the light was fine, and he does not use that excuse again for 2 years. She starts to lose. I do nothing at all to make it happen. The shape of the thing finally gets its hands on her, the way it gets its hands on everyone, and the shape does not care how clever she is. She loses 40 back, she wins 10, she loses 60. Somewhere in there, she stops stacking her tokens neatly, and I watch her stop, and my stomach turns over the way it did the night I invented the tokens. Because I have seen this exact sequence 100 times from the other side of a table, and I know the next 3 moves before she makes them, and I make them available to her anyway. At midnight, she is level. At the hour after midnight, she is 200 down, and she says the thing they all say. She has finally seen the pattern in it, and she needs a bigger stake to use it. There is no pattern. There is never a pattern. I tell her so out loud in front of witnesses, and she looks at me with those coin-colored eyes and tells me to deal. By the gray hour before dawn, Silvara of the Deepstone line has lost 1,090 scales, and she has stopped speaking between hands. Then she puts one claw flat on the felt and says it in a calm voice with nothing moving in it at all. She says, I stake the west gallery of the Deepstone hoard, everything under the 3rd arch, against everything I have lost tonight in one hand. I stop dealing. I put the cards face down on the hide, and I put both hands flat on the table, and I say, no. The whole door goes silent. Varos actually backs up a step. Nobody in this world has ever heard the house refuse a stake, because until 3 months ago, there was no house to refuse anything. Silvara asks me if I am afraid. I tell her the truth, which is yes, but not of her. I say, if you put that up and lose it, then tomorrow you hate me, and the day after that you come back here with your whole line. She says one word. Deal. So I explain the odds of the hand out loud, every branch of it, slowly, twice, in the flattest voice I own, because Rule 1 says the stake is named before the cards move, and I intend to name the price with it. Then I deal. And she loses. She loses by 1 card, and there is no worse way to lose anything. Window opens over the table in red letters, and it is the largest one I have ever seen. Wager settled. Loser, Silvara of the Deepstone. Stake, the West Gallery, contents entire. Collection by force under absolute debt. We all hear it. Somewhere out west, under a mountain I have never seen, a wall of stone comes down, and a room full of 9 centuries of gathered gold gets up and starts moving east across the ash in the dark. It arrives at my house at sunrise. It arrives for 2 hours. It comes over the ridge in a river, and it piles up behind my hall until the pile is taller than the roof. Silvara does not watch it come. She stands with her back to the ridge and her head down, and she does not make a sound, and every dragon at my door slowly finds somewhere else to be. When it is done and the ash has settled, she says, in a very small voice for such an enormous creature, that the West Gallery held the gifts of her mother and her mother's mother, and that gold is not what it was. I ask her what it was. She says, it was the count of everyone in her line who ever gave her something. 900 years of a family, sorted by arch, and she has just poured the 3rd arch onto a stranger's floor. I sit down on my own doorstep and I feel sick, and it is a different sick from the one after the first horn. This is the other kind. This is my father's kind. Because I know what she did last night. She did not lose to bad cards. She lost to the same thing that took my father's house, and I built the machine that did it, and I built it on purpose, and I warned her 3 times so that I could sleep. So I break my own rule. Not the wall rules. The rule under them, the one every house in every world keeps, which is that the house never gives anything back. I stand up and I tell Silvara that the West Gallery stays where it lies, because a stake paid is paid, and if I hand it back, the wall means nothing, and the system writes me down as a liar. But, I say, I will hire you. She turns her head very slowly, 1 notch at a time, until her eye is level with mine. She asks whether I have lost my mind. I say, work the gallery off. Come and stand on my side of the table. I will pay you against the debt at a rate we agree out loud in front of witnesses, and when the number reaches 0, you take your family's gold home. She asks how long that would take. I do the arithmetic in my head, and I do not soften it, because softening a number is how you lose someone's trust forever. I tell her at fair wages, about 2 years. 2 years, she says. I say, 2 years, or 900 years of your mother's gold sits behind my house forever. Those are the doors. I do not have a 3rd one. Then Silvara laughs, and it is not a pleasant sound, and she says, you have just offered a dragon a job. I tell her yes, and that she is the best card player who has ever walked into this place, and that includes me. I mean that plainly. It is a fact, and she knows it is a fact, and I watch it land, and I watch her decide, and it takes her about 6 breaths. She says, What would I even do? And I say, there is a thing you can do that no dragon here can do, and I have needed it for a month, and you are going to hate me for asking. Then I tell her that she has to learn the cards properly, and that she cannot do it with a claw the size of my leg, and that she is going to have to take a human shape. Every dragon within earshot makes a noise. Sereth actually leaves. I have to ask Varos afterwards what the noise meant. Tells me that the old ones can wear a human shape. It costs them nothing. They simply consider it the most undignified thing a dragon can do, a bit like a duke agreeing to be carried in a sack. Silvara stands in the ash in front of my house for a long moment. Then, the shape of the world bends in a way I never get used to, and there is a woman standing where 100 feet of dragon was. She is tall, black hair with blue running under it, the way oil sits on water, skin the color of dark stone, and the eyes do not change at all. The eyes are how I know her from now on. She is wearing a long dark coat that is not cloth and never was, and she looks at her own hands with an expression of pure disgust, and she says, "These are appalling. There are so many small pieces." I hand her a deck of cards. She drops it. She picks it up with both hands like a woman lifting a bird. She drops it again. I have never in my life wanted to laugh so badly and lived. It takes her 4 days to learn to shuffle. On the 5th day, she deals a clean hand and looks up at me with a face I have not seen on her yet, and it is close enough to pleased that I decide not to say anything. On the 9th day, she runs her first table alone, and the dragons on the other side of it do not know where to look because a woman half the size of their smallest claw is telling them to keep their stakes behind the line. She is very good. She is better than me inside a month. She has 9 centuries of watching creatures lie, and she can read a bluff off a face the way I read a price off a shelf. We argue every single day about the rates, about the hours, about the tokens, which she says are a swindle, and which I say are a convenience. And we are both right, and both of us know it. Our first real fight is about the drinks. I want to serve something. Every house I ever worked in ran on the fact that a full glass keeps a man in his chair, and I have goats and grain and no idea how to brew. She says, absolutely not. She says, you are already taking their gold, and now you want to fog their heads first. Put that in the wall rules and see how it reads next to the 5th one. She is right. She is right in a way that stings, and I stand there with my mouth open. And then I go outside and cut a 6th rule into the black stone with my own hands. 6. Nothing that clouds the head is sold or given at the tables. Water, food, nothing else. A player who cannot lose with a clear head does not get to lose with a soft one. She reads it and says nothing at all. But that night, she stays 2 hours past the close, sorting tokens she does not need to sort. And when she leaves, she says, "Sleep, Kaito," in a voice I have not heard her use before. It is the first time she says my name. I sit on my straw in the dark and think about that for far longer than a sensible man would. The house grows all through that winter, and it grows the way Silvara points it. 6 tables instead of 2. A hall longer than my first house was wide, and the card game cut short because she says no dragon will sit still for slow. The only thing we truly fight about that winter is a hole in a wall. I am cutting it myself, low in the back of the counting room, when she comes in and asks me what I think I am making. I tell her, from tonight, the winners take their gold out through there, in the dark, behind the hall, where nobody standing in the ash can see the size of the sack going home. She says, why? I say, because no dragon will ever admit to leaving here poorer, and a creature carrying his winnings out of my front door has to boast about them, and a creature who boasts gets argued with. She stands there and works it forward, and I watch her get to the end of it before I have finished the sentence. She says, and a creature nobody sees win is a creature nobody knows can win. She says, so every one of them walks home in the dark believing the house never pays out. You have just cut a hole in your own wall to hide the only proof you have that you are honest. That is the price, and I know it while I am cutting. I am buying quiet at the door and paying for it with the one thing a gambling house cannot buy, which is a room full of witnesses to somebody else's good night. I keep the hole. She says out loud that she thinks it is a swindle wearing a coat, and then she holds the shutter while I hang it, because that is how we do everything that winter. One of us gives ground, out loud, on purpose. By the end of it, there are 91 names in the ledger she keeps, from 4 corners of a continent, coming to a stone hall in the ash to lose gold to a man who cannot lift a full sack of it. House takes between 2 and 600 scales in a week. I pay Varos 40 a month to stand at the door and take breath off anyone who forgets Rule 3, and he wears the job like a crown. And then in the second spring, on a morning with no wind, a cart comes over the ridge from the west with human soldiers walking beside it, and there are 11 people chained in the back of it. I have seen carts like that before. I rode east in one. The difference is that this one has a cage built onto the bed of it, and there are people sitting inside the cage. 11 of them, chained at the ankle, dirty, quiet in the way people go quiet when they have already done all their shouting somewhere back down the road. The soldiers do not come near the house. They stop the cart 300 paces out on the flat, unhitch the horses, cut the chain that holds the cage door, and then they run. I watch grown men in the livery of my own king run west across the ash without once looking behind them, and I understand what I am looking at before Silvara says a word. She says it anyway, because she can see I want to hear it out loud. She says, the border tithe. Every spring, the humans send condemned men to the edge of the ash, and in return, the raids stay small. I ask how long that has been going on. She says, since before her mother. 12 or 15 a year, she thinks, for something like 600 springs. She says it the way you would mention a road toll. Then she says, whoever comes first takes them. And there is already a shadow on the ridge, and it is Sereth, and he is coming down fast. I am running before I have decided to. I am a soft man with no weapon and no magic, and I am running at a landing dragon across open ash, and the only thing in my head is my own wall. Rule 5. Sereth lands between me and the cart and folds his wings and looks at me with something that is almost amusement. He says, "You are in my food." I say, "Name a price." I say it out of breath, with my hands up, and I say it because it is the only sentence in this world that has ever worked for me. He says he has no need of gold. He has a haul of it, and lately he has more of it than he wants, since he keeps handing it to me. He says it dryly, and it is very nearly a joke. And there it is, the whole problem in one line. My only tool is money, and my customer already has all the money there is. So I stop selling gold and start selling the other thing. I ask him what he did with his last 1,000 scales. He does not answer, because the answer is that he did nothing with them at all. Then I make the offer. I say, the seat at the head of the long table, the first one, the one everyone can see from the door. I will cut your name into the stone above it, and it will be yours while the house stands. I say, when a new game opens, you play it first, before anyone. When the house calls the tables, it calls your name first. Nobody sits in that chair, ever, for any price. Sereth goes very still, and I know I have him, because I have just offered a creature that owns everything, the one thing he cannot buy, which is to be seen owning it. He asks what I want for this. I point at the cage. I say, those 11, and everyone that comes after them, forever. The tithe stops at my door. He wants to argue about the forever, so I let him take a second seat out of me, the one at the dice, and he tells me at once that nobody sits in it, ever. Not even him, because an empty chair cannot be taken off a creature. Then we shake on it, and I have to show him how a handshake works, and he enjoys it so much that he does it twice more before he lets go of my arm. The system window opens, without either of us asking. Agreement logged between the house and the green drake Sereth of the Split Ridge. And that is that. 11 people bought for a chair. They do not understand what has happened. When I open the cage, they will not come out. One of them tells me politely that they know what we are and to please get it over with. I have to sit down on the step of the cart and explain 3 times that nobody is going to eat them, that this is a place of business, and that I am from a town they have never heard of, and I got here in a cart too. One who finally believes me is a boy of about 13 with a shaved head and a broken front tooth. His name is Tam. He was condemned for stealing bread, which he tells me twice, in case I was going to argue about it. The oldest is a woman called Morella, 61, who was sent east for selling medicine without a license. She looks at my hall and asks whether there is a kitchen. I say no. She says, there is now. There is a man called Bran, who used to be a sergeant of the West Gate before he hit an officer. He does not say much. He gets down from the cart, looks at the ridge full of dragons watching us, and asks me where the walls are. Tell him there are no walls, and that the walls are going to be his problem, and he nods slowly as though this is the first sensible thing anyone has said to him in a year. By the end of that week, I have 11 employees. By the end of the month, I have a bunkhouse of black stone behind the hall, a kitchen with a chimney, and a woman who makes flatbread that dragons will fly 2 days to smell. That is the joke of it. They do not eat, but they come and put their heads under the roof and breathe over Murella's oven, because it is warm and new, and nobody has ever cooked anything on this continent before. Sam turns out to be the most useful person I have ever hired. He runs tokens between the tables at a dead sprint, he remembers every stake, and he is not afraid of the players because he never learned to be. Within a fortnight, the dragons know him. Within a month, there is a young blue one who will not start a hand until Tam has touched his tokens, because he has decided the boy is lucky. Bran counts my gold, sets the watch, and tells me on his 3rd day that I have a hole in my business the size of the sky. He says, if any one of these things loses its temper, everything you built ends in a minute. He is right, and I have known it since the first morning, so I go and do the only thing I know how to do about it, which is to turn it into a contract. At night, I close the tables early. I stand in my own doorway with 90 heads in the ash outside, and I tell them the house has a new rule, and it goes on the wall, and it goes into the system. 7. Every player of this house pledges his hoard against the life of anyone who works here. Touch a member of the house and the system takes everything you own that hour, without argument. 90 heads out there in the dark and not one sound off any of them. Then Sereth says that this is the most insulting thing he has ever been asked to agree to. I say, that is correct, and the tables are closed until every name on the ledger has agreed. Then I sit down on my step and I fold my hands and I wait. It takes 11 minutes. 11. 91 dragons pledge the entire wealth of 91 bloodlines against the safety of a cook, a boy, a broken sergeant, and 8 strangers because they want to play cards. Silvara stands beside me while the windows open one after another in the dark, and she does not say anything until the last one closes. Then she says, do you know what you just did? I say, I bought them a wall. She says, no, You found the one thing they cannot say no to, and you put your hand on it, and not one of them out there has noticed yet, and I have. She is angry, and she is not wrong, and she is also standing shoulder to shoulder with me in my doorway at midnight while I do it. Both things are true, and I do not know what to do with either. Then she says, in a different voice, that the boy has been sleeping in the token store because he is afraid of the open dark, and would I please build him a room with a door on it. I build it the next day. She does not mention it again, but every night after that she checks the door on her way out, and I catch her at it twice, and both times she looks at me like she will fight me if I speak. Far away to the west, in a marble hall with light coming up through the floor, a clerk of the crown reads out a report about the Eastern tithe, and King Aldrich has him read it twice. 11 condemned men, delivered to the ash as always. The escort saw a stone hall standing in dragon country, and human faces at the door of it, and a young man who was giving orders and being obeyed. King asks a single question. He asks whether there was gold. The clerk says the escort saw a heap of it behind the hall taller than the roof, and the room goes very quiet, and Aldrich asks for the summoning records. Back east, I am building a machine, and I am building it because I have started to lose my nerve about the card tables. The trouble with cards is that a clever player can grind the edge down. Silvara can. Osara could if she ever put a scale on the felt, which she still has not. On a bad week, the house barely takes anything. I want a game with no skill in it at all. A game where the player pulls a handle and the machine decides, and there is nothing to learn, ever, no matter how long you sit there. I have never built anything in my life. Bran has. He was a gate sergeant, and before that, a carpenter's son, and when I draw the thing in the ash, he looks at it for a while and then goes to find pine. It takes us 19 days, and Varos watches every one of them. 3 wheels of hard wood on one axle, each painted with 6 symbols, and he puts a claw on the first wheel and turns it just to hear the noise it makes. A wooden lever on a spring of twisted gut, a ratchet on each wheel so it stops with a bang, a hopper of tokens on top, and Sereth counts the tokens in that hopper out loud and asks me whose they are. Line up 3 of the same symbol, I tell him, and the hopper drops them at your feet. 3 flames pays 10. He says 10 is an insult to a creature with a mountain, and he says it loudly, in front of 4 others. 3 crowns pays 50. That stops the complaining. Then I tell them about the 3 suns, which appear on one wheel only once and pay 1,000, and Varos asks what it costs to be the one who pulls first. I wait it. That is the whole art of it, and it takes me 4 days. The 3 suns will come up about once in every 800 pulls, and every pull costs 1 white token, and I sit with that number for a long time before I nail the last board on. Silvara asks me to explain the arithmetic. I do, honestly, all of it. She listens to the end, and then she says, so it eats 1 out of every 5 scales that goes into it, forever, and never gets tired, and never sleeps. I say yes. She says, then it is the cruelest thing you have made, and she stands there and watches me nail the lid on anyway, and neither of us says anything else about it. We open it on a night with no wind. Varos pulls the lever first because he has bought that right for the price of 100 scales, which I did not even have to suggest, he offered. The wheels go around with a noise like a cart on gravel and stop one after another. Clack, 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 and the middle wheel lands on a flame, and the hall makes a noise I have never heard a hall make. He wins nothing. He pulls again. He wins 10. He howls like a hunting horn, and every dragon in the ash outside stands up. By the end of that night, there is a queue for a wooden box. A queue. Silvara told me they would never queue, and here are 9 of the oldest creatures in the world standing in a line in the dark, waiting for a lever. Inside a month, I have built 4 more. Inside 2 months, the lever machines make more for the house than every table in the hall put together, and I know exactly what that means, and I keep building them. Mirath is the one who breaks first. Silvara's nephew, Silver Blue, 200 years old, the one whose losses brought her to my door in the first place. He comes in with nothing. He has been coming in with nothing for a week. He stands at the door and asks for tokens against his hoard, and I point at Rule 4, which says, the house never lends. He begs. A creature the size of a barn in front of 90 of his own kind, begging a human for wooden buttons. Silvara turns her back and walks the length of the hall so she does not have to watch it. I do the thing I am not proud of. I do not lend him anything. I do something worse, and I dress it up as a kindness, and it makes the house more money than every other decision I have taken. I open the pawn desk. I tell him the house does not lend, but the house will buy. He signs the west chamber of his hoard over to me at 9/10 of its worth in front of the system, and I pay him in tokens on the spot. And the contract says he may buy it back at the same price, anytime, for a year. That clause is what makes him sign. That clause is also why he will never buy it back, and I already know it. The window opens. Mortgage logged. Mirath of the Deepstone West Chamber, 4,200 scales. I hand him a stack of red tokens, and he goes straight to the 3rd lever machine. Loses all of it in 90 minutes. I watch him do it from the end of the hall with my arms folded, and I am counting the take, and my hands are steady, and that is what frightens me. Silvara does not speak to me for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she puts a cup of water down in front of me and says, in a level voice, that her sister's son now owns nothing but the shape he stands up in. I tell her the truth. He came to me. She says, yes, he came to you. You built a place he cannot stay away from, and then you stood in the door of it and called it his own choice. Then Osara comes. She has not been to the house in 5 weeks, and she does not come at night with the others. She comes at noon, when the tables are cold, and she puts her gray head in the door. She says, I have counted. Since the levers came, 11 of my kind have signed away chambers of their hoards. 3 of them are older than the human kingdom. 1 of them is a queen in her own reach. I say, nobody made them. She says, no. Nobody made the river either, and she uses the same word Silvara used, on the same day, without either of them speaking to the other, and that lands harder than any threat. Then she asks me for one thing, not to close, not to give anything back. She asks me to put a limit on the tables, a ceiling on what any one player may lose in a single night, cut into the wall with the others. And I say no. I say it fast before I can think about it, and I hear my own voice doing the thing my old floor manager used to do. It sounds reasonable, and it is rotten. I tell her that a ceiling is an insult, that they are grown creatures, that Rule 1 names every price out loud, that nobody in my house has ever been lied to about anything. Sarah listens to all of it. Then she says, you are a young thing, and you have built a very clever machine, and one day it will show you what it is for, and I hope you are still able to look at it. She leaves. I go back inside, and I count the take. It is the best week the house has ever had, and I feel nothing at all about it, and that is the true beginning of the trouble. 2 nights later, the ash outside my door goes silent in the middle of a full session, which never happens, and every head in the hall turns west. There is a black shape coming in low over the ridge with 2 more behind it, and Varos, who is not afraid of anything, steps back from my door and says one word. Kaldrek. Kaldrek is black, and he is bigger than anything that has ever landed at my door, and he does not land in front of the house. He lands on it. The roof takes his weight for about 2 heartbeats. Then the pine gives and the slabs come down, and half my hall is open to the sky, and there is a dragon standing in the wreck of the token store with Tam somewhere underneath it. Bran gets to the boy first. I am still running when he drags him out by the collar, coughing, filthy, alive. Morella's oven is in 3 pieces, and the flatbread is burning on the stones. Kaldrek looks around at the ruin of 2 years of work and says he has heard there is a human here who collects gold, and that he has come to explain who the gold belongs to. I want to say something clever. What comes out of my mouth is that he has broken Rule 3 and owes the house 3 times the cost of the roof, and I hear how ridiculous it sounds while it is still in the air. He laughs. It is a horrible sound, like stones in a barrel. He says he is not a player. He says he is the hand of Ignis, and that everything east of the Fire Mountains is the king's, including the ash under my boots. Then he names his price. Half. Half of every scale in my back room, half of every take, every month, forever, delivered to the Fire Mountains, and the house may go on standing as long as it keeps paying. I look at the hole in my roof, and the boy bleeding on the floor, and 90 dragons standing out in the ash doing nothing at all, and I understand exactly how thin my whole life is. Because there is no system window for this. The pledge covers my people against players, and Kaldrek has never put a token down in his life. He is outside my machine entirely, and he knows it, and that is why he came. So I do the only thing left. I stop talking to him and I start talking to the crowd. I raise my voice and I ask loudly whether the king's hand has come all this way because the king is afraid of a wooden box with a lever on it. The ash goes silent. Kaldrek turns his head very slowly, and I keep going because I have already jumped and there is no clever way to land. I say, you have stood in my hall for 3 minutes and you have not asked what any of it is. Everyone here has played. Everyone here has won something and lost something. You came to collect a tax on a thing you have never even tried. He says he does not play children's games. I say, then you are the only creature on this continent who cannot. And I say it in front of Sarath and Varos and 11 others. And I watch it go in. That is the whole trick, and it is a cheap one, and it works on anything that has ever cared what a room thinks of it. He cannot walk away now. If he walks away, he is the one who was frightened of the cups. He says, 1 game. If he wins, he takes half, and my head as well, since I have been rude. If he loses, he pays for the roof and goes home. I say no. I am not being brave. The first offer is never the deal, and if I take it, he learns he can set the price. I tell him the stake I want, and the whole ridge hears me name it. If he loses, he pays for the roof, and he takes the pledge like every other player in this house, on his own hoard, against the lives of my people. He agrees. Of course he agrees, because he is certain, and certainty is the only thing I have ever been able to sell against. I play at the long table under an open sky with a dragon sitting in the wreckage of my roof. Bran gets Tam to the bunkhouse. Morella stands in her ruined kitchen and will not leave it. Silvara deals. Here is what I want understood about that night. Kaldrek wins the first 6 hands, one after another, and I sit there and let every single one of them happen. He wins them because that is what happens, and because I do not do a single thing to stop it, and because 6 is a beautiful number for a man who has never lost anything in his life. The 6th, he has forgotten why he came. He is leaning in over the table with his eyes half shut, and his tail is moving behind him in the ash like a cat at a window, and Silvara catches my eye once and does not blink. On the 9th hand, he asks whether the stake can be raised. There it is. He came here to tax me, and now he wants to bet more, and nobody made him say it, and everyone heard him say it. We play until the sun is well up. When it ends, Caldric of the Fire Mountains owes the house 11,000 scales, a new roof, and a pledge on everything his line has ever dug out of the ground. And he will not pay. He stands up out of the wreck of my building and says he is the hand of the king and that no window of light tells him what he owes. He says the debt is void because he says it is. The system does not argue with anybody. The red letters open over the table and the wind changes and something in the Fire Mountains, 3 days flight away, starts moving. Then Caldrek does the thing I have been afraid of since the first morning. He decides that if he kills the dealer, there is no house. And if there is no house, there is no debt. He comes across the table at me. I do not have time to be frightened. I have time to see the mouth open and to think, without any words in it, that I never did get to send Morella home. Varos hits him from the side. I do not see where he comes from. I only see the two of them go through my south wall and into the ash and hear a noise that I feel in my back teeth, and then there is nothing but dust for a long moment. When it clears, Varos is on his feet and Caldrek is not. Varos has a wound down his flank from shoulder to hip that will scar for the rest of his very long life, and he is standing between me and the king's hand. And then Sareth walks out into the ash and stands beside him, and then the blue one that thinks Tam is lucky, and then 11 more, and then 30, and none of them say a single word. They are not protecting me. I want to be honest about that because it is the only reason it worked. They are protecting the tables, but from where I am standing, flat on my back in the wreck of my house, it looks the same. Caldrek gets up. He looks at 40 of his own kind, standing in a line in front of a human, and something goes across his face that I do not have a name for, and it is not anger. It looks closer to fear. He says, "You have made them tame." He says it like a curse, and he means it as one, and he flies west with a debt of 11,000 scales following him through the air in red letters. Far to the west, in a hall of black glass on the shoulder of a burning mountain, the king of the dragons is listening to Caldrek explain why he came back with nothing. Ignis does not shout. He is the color of a coal at the bottom of a fire, and the floor of his hall is molten in 3 places, and he has not stood up in 90 years. He asks 2 questions only. He asks whether the human cheats. Caldrek says no. He asks whether the human is afraid. Caldrek says no and cannot look at him while he says it. Then Ignis puts his head back down on the hot stone and closes his eyes and says a thing that his own hand does not understand, and neither do I, because I am 3 days east of him, and I know nothing about any of it. He says, "So something new has happened after all. Rebuild the roof in 5 days. Varos will not let anyone else carry the beams, and he will not talk about the wound either, and Morella feeds him flatbread he does not eat but takes anyway. The 11,000 comes in on the 4th night without him. The system walks it east out of the Fire Mountains and stacks it behind my hall in the dark, and the roof money sits on top in a sack with his line mark burned into the hide. Caldrek himself does not come and sends no word. The pledge came east with the gold all the same, and the hand of the Dragon King is bound at my door now by the same rule as the smallest whelp in the ash, and the whole ridge watched it land. I pay him. That matters to me more than it sounds. I put 400 scales in front of the door where everyone can see it, and I say out loud what it is for, so nobody in this world ever calls it a gift. He says a doorman is not supposed to need paying for the one night he was needed. I tell him that is exactly when a doorman gets paid, and he stands up a little taller, and that night he takes his post an hour early. Silvara finds me after, sitting in the dark with a cup of Morella's water, and my hands finally shaking the way they should have shaken hours ago. She sits down beside me on the step. Not the dragon. The woman in the coat that is not cloth, with her elbows on her knees like a laborer at the end of a shift. She says, "He was going to kill you." I say, "I know." She says, "And you talked to the crowd instead of to him, and I have been trying all night to decide whether that was brave or whether you are simply broken in a useful way." I tell her the truth. I say, "My father used to talk to the room, right up until the room stopped listening, and then he had nothing, and I have been terrified of nothing my whole life." She does not say anything for a while. Then she asks what happened to him. I tell her, the house, the second house, the loans, the men at the door, and the 15 years my mother spent paying for one good night that never came. She says, "And you built this?" I say, "Yes." She says, "That is either the sickest thing I have ever heard or the only sane thing you could have done, and I do not know which, and neither do you." Then she puts her hand on top of mine on the step, once, briefly, and takes it away again, and gets up and goes to check the door on Tam's room. I sit there for a long time afterwards with an empty cup, and I think about how strange it is that the safest I have felt in 2 years was a hand on my hand for about 4 seconds. Next month is the best the house has ever had. 91 names becomes 130. The lever machines run from dusk to dawn. Bran hires 4 more humans off the spring tithe cart and puts them in aprons. And on a bright cold morning in the middle of it, a man in a good coat comes over the ridge on a white horse with a banner on a pole and 12 soldiers walking behind him. Nobody eats him, which tells me everything. He has come with a safe passage, and the only creature on this continent who can grant one of those is sitting on a burning mountain 3 days west. His name is Lord Perrin. He has soft boots and a clerk with a box, and he stands in the middle of my hall looking at the ceiling and says, "So this is it." He does not ask about the dragons. That is what I notice. There are two of them at the open front of the hall with their heads inside, listening, and this man does not look at them once. Sareth works it out before I do. He slides his head in another foot and breathes on the back of Perrin's neck, hard enough to lift the man's hair off his collar. Perrin smooths it down and goes on telling me how delighted the crown is. So Sareth comes in further. His jaw is on my floor beside the clerk's boots now, and one eye is wider than the box the clerk is holding. And the clerk has stopped writing and started, very quietly, to sweat. Perrin does not turn round. He asks me whether the roof counts as crown property or house property. Behind him, a creature the length of my hall is putting real effort into being noticed by a man with a scroll and getting nowhere. Then Varos, who is the other head in that doorway, stops pretending to look at the ceiling and leans in as well. And that finishes me, because the two of them start looking at each other over the top of Lord Perrin like men waiting in a queue. Sareth gives up and says out loud, in a voice you can feel through the soles of your boots, that he is standing right here. Perrin says, yes, thank you, and turns the page. Bran gets about 10 paces out of the door before he starts laughing. Morella hits him with something wooden and he keeps laughing anyway. I stand there with my hands folded and my face like a wall, and it costs me everything I have. He tells me the crown is delighted that the hero of the summoning has prospered. He says the word hero, and his mouth goes small when he says it, and I do not miss that. Then his clerk opens the box and takes out a scroll with a seal the size of my palm, and Perrin reads it aloud, and my whole life turns over for the second time. Is the summoning contract. The one the priest sealed on the floor of that marble hall while I was standing in the circle, not understanding a word of what was happening around me. And there is a clause in it. There is always a clause. The crown that pays for a summoning holds a claim on the works and gains of the summoned, because the crown paid for the ritual and the ritual made the man. Perrin reads the numbers out in a pleasant voice. 2/3 of all gains to be delivered to the crown. The house itself to be placed under a steward appointed by the king. 60 days from today. I ask what happens if I refuse. He is genuinely surprised by the question. He says, nothing happens. The claim is filed with the system, and the system collects. Then he reads out the last line of the clause. He says, by force, from the debtor, without exception. Those are my own words in a stranger's mouth, and my stomach goes cold while he is still saying them. I ask the system, right there in front of him. The window opens pale and calm in the air where only I can read it, and it agrees with him in every particular. Claim registered. Crown of the Western Kingdom against the summoned. 2/3 of all gains. Enforcement, absolute debt. Days remaining, 60. Absolute debt. My own skill. The one thing that has kept me alive since the first morning, aimed at me, held by a man with clean hands who threw me out of a cart. Perrin watches my face, and he is enjoying it, and he makes the mistake that every single one of them makes, which is that he cannot stop himself from telling me the rest. He says the king wishes it known that he does not want the gold especially. He wants the arrangement, a human house in the ash that pays the crown 2/3 and takes tribute prisoners off the border books. He says, in 100 years the histories will say His Majesty planted a colony in Dragon Country with one clever man and a cart. He says it like he is offering me a place in a song. I ask him what happens to my people. He looks at his clerk. The clerk consults a list and says that the condemned remain condemned and that a crown steward would of course return them to the tithe. Behind me, I hear Bran stop breathing. Morella is standing in her kitchen door with a wooden spoon in her hand. Tam is sitting on the token counter with his legs swinging, and he has stopped swinging them. I tell Lord Perrin that he will have his answer inside the 60 days. I tell him politely. I walk him to his horse, and I hold the bridle while he mounts, and I smile the whole way, and I do not stop smiling until the banner is over the ridge. And I go inside, and I sit down on the floor of my own hall, with my back against the pawn desk. And for the first time since I woke up in a cart, I cannot find the next move. Because I know this trick. It is my trick. He has not attacked me. He has bought the road my whole business has to walk down, and he did it 2 years before I ever knew the road existed. Selvara comes and sits down on the floor beside me, which cannot be comfortable in that shape, and she asks how much 2/3 is. I tell her. Every scale in the back room, the pawn contracts, the levers, all of it, and then 2/3 of everything the house makes from now until I am dead, forever, to a man who sent me here to be eaten. She asks whether I can pay it and keep the doors open. I run it 3 times before I answer, because I want to be sure I am not lying to her out of pride. I say, I can pay it, and then this place belongs to him, and my people go back in a cage, and I spend the rest of my life dealing cards for the man who put me in that cart. She does not tell me it will be all right. She is not built that way. She just says 60 days and stands up and goes to open the tables because we have 130 players coming and none of them care. I spend the first 8 of my 60 days looking for a door, the way I have looked for a door my whole life, and there is not one anywhere in the wall. Paying it is the first thing I work out on paper. 2/3 looks like handing over the back room, the levers and every pawn contract, and then working the rest of my life for a wage that is set in another country. So I go the other way and ask the system carefully what counts as a gain. The window tells me that gains are gains wherever they sit, in whatever hands, under whatever name, and that transfers do not clear a claim. Fine, I think. Then I close, and there is no house, and there are no gains. I read the clause again, and it covers the works of the summoned, which means my hands, which means I could deal cards under a bridge and still owe him 2/3 of the bridge. That leaves running. Bran and I walk 3 days east and stand on a cliff and look at a gray sea with no ships on it and nothing at all on the far side, and we walk back without saying much. On the 9th day, I stop looking for the door and start doing the only other thing I know. I get bigger. If I cannot escape the claim, I will make the number underneath it so large that everything changes shape. So I build the wheel. I have been putting it off for a year because it frightened me, and it frightened me because it is the best game ever invented, and I know exactly what it does to people. Bran cuts the disc out of a single slab of pine, waist high and wider than my arms can reach. Morella boils bone glue. Tam sands it for 2 days until the top of it is smoother than water. 36 pockets around the rim, each one numbered, half of them painted red and half painted black. And then, at the top of the wheel, one more pocket painted green, and that one has no number in it at all. Silvara asks what the green one is for. I tell her, and I tell her plainly because by now, I have stopped dressing things up in front of her. I say, the green pocket is the house. You bet on a number, I say. If your number comes up, I pay you 35 for one. That sounds enormous, and it is meant to. There are 37 pockets, and I only pay for 35. The green pocket takes everything on the table. Every color bet, every number bet, all of it. The whole cloth cleared into the house in one turn. It comes up about once in every 37 spins. She does not call it cruel. She spent that word on the lever machines, and I nodded and built 4 more, so she has stopped wasting it on me. What she does instead is ask me a question about myself. She says, in your own world, did you ever sit on the wrong side of a table like this one? I say yes, twice. She asks whether I knew the arithmetic when I sat down, and I tell her I knew every part of it. Then she says, so your wheel does not eat fools. It eats the ones who can count and sit down anyway, and there is nothing you can cut into that wall that reaches them. I stand there with a hammer in my hand, and I cannot put one word against it. She asks whether the pocket has a name. I tell her that back home they call it the zero, and she says the word once, quietly and then again, and she does not like it. I open the wheel on a night in the 3rd week of my 60 days, and there are 140 heads in the ash outside my house, and the noise when the ball drops is like nothing I have ever heard in my life. The wheel changes everything inside a week. The lever machines were for the young ones and the middling ones. The wheel is for the ancients. The wheel is for the ones who own mountains. I set the minimum at 1 black token, which is 100 scales, and I set it that high on purpose, because the fastest way to make an ancient creature want a table is to tell it the table is not for everyone. Within 4 nights, I have a queen at my wheel, Andrasa the Copper, 1200 years old, whose reach runs from the salt flats to the northern ice, and who has never in her life been outside her own territory before this. She comes with an escort of 9, and she plays for 2 nights straight without moving, and she wins and wins and wins, and on the 3rd night, she nearly ends me. I have run bad nights before. This one is past bad. This is a run of the kind that a house sees once in a decade, and I stand at the rim of my own wheel and watch it happen with a smile nailed to my face. She takes the number 11 straight up, 35 for 1. Then she leaves it and takes it again, and the hall makes a sound like a wave, and I pay her because Rule 2 says I pay in full, and I pay the same hour. By the middle of the 3rd night, Andrasa the Copper is up 41,000 scales, and there is not enough gold in my back room to cover her. Not nearly enough. There is more gold with my name on it than any king has ever seen, and tonight I cannot pay 1 bill with it. It is out in pawn slates and contracts and other creatures' mountains, not in my room. 2/3 of everything I own is paper. Pawn contracts on 11 hoards, none of them do, none of them worth a single scale tonight. The levers hold tokens, not gold. The gold went out the back window all week to winners. And does the count twice. Then he comes and stands beside me at the wheel with his hands behind his back like the sergeant he used to be and says quietly that we are 9,000 short. 9,000 scales, due inside the hour, under my own rule, cut into my own wall, in front of 140 of them. And under the rule sits the other thing. If the house cannot pay what the house owes, the system does not shrug. The system collects from the house. And the house is not a building. The house is a man with a deck of cards. I have seen what collection looks like. I watched a scale come off Varos on my first morning. I have no gold left to give, and the system is not sentimental about what it takes instead. Andrasa asks for her payout, politely. She has been polite the entire time, which somehow makes it worse. I do the only honest thing there is. I tell her the truth in front of the whole hall. I say, the house owes you 41,000 and the house has 32,000 in the room. I am 9 short and I have 1 hour. Nobody moves. 140 creatures who have watched me pay every winner for 2 years, on the hour, every time, are now watching me stand at my own wheel and say the word short. That is when Silvara puts her hand flat on the rim of the wheel and says, The house will pay in full," and walks out of the hall into the dark. She is gone 40 minutes. I stand at the wheel and keep the tables running because stopping would be worse. And I deal a game I cannot remember afterwards, and my hands do not shake, and I hate them for it. Then the ash outside the door starts to move, and it moves the way it moved on the morning the West Gallery came over the ridge. And gold comes up out of the dark in a river and stacks itself behind my house. 9,000 scales, and then some. Andrasa the copper is paid in full inside the hour, in front of every witness on the continent, and she inclines her enormous head to me and says that the house keeps its word. I go looking for Silvara. She is behind the bunkhouse in her human shape, sitting on a stone with her back to me, and when I ask her where the gold came from, she says, "A lender." I ask what lender. She says, "One who does not want his name in your ledger." I ask her to look at me while she says it. She does. 900 years of practice at not blinking, and I get nothing at all. So I let it go because we are open in 3 hours and I am too tired to fight, and letting it go is the stupidest thing I have done since I got here. The next morning, I put a new rule on the wall and I cut it myself, and Osera is not there to see it, which is a shame because it is hers. 8. No player may lose more than 500 scales in one night at this house. When you reach it, you are done, and the doors are open again at dusk tomorrow. Bran tells me it will cost us a fortune. He is right. It costs us about a fifth of the take, which over my 60 days is enough gold to build another hall. I do it anyway, and I do it for a reason that has nothing to do with mercy. Andrasa did not break me by winning. She broke me because there was no ceiling anywhere in my house, and a house with no ceiling can be turned upside down by anyone. I explain that to Bran. I tell him the limit is not a kindness, it is a wall against my own greed, and that every business that ever died in my old world died because somebody removed the wall on a good night. Then I go and find Silvara, and I tell her the same thing, and she listens to the whole speech, and at the end of it she says, "You could simply say that you did it because Osera asked you to." I say, "That would not be accurate." She says, "No, but it would be true." And then she smiles at me for the first time since the day she lost the West Gallery, and I have to go and stand outside for a minute. The limit changes the shape of the house completely. When you can only lose 500 a night, you come more nights. 90 of them start turning up daily instead of weekly. The take per player falls. The number of players rises. And the number that actually matters, the one I put on the wall of the counting room, is that after 2 weeks with a ceiling, the house is making more, not less. I stand there looking at that number with a piece of chalk in my hand, and I laugh out loud, because I have been told all my life by men in good suits that a limit is money left on the table. And here is the proof, in gold, that they were wrong. 22 days left on the claim, and we are making 110 scales a night after every payout. That is more than any human duchy earns in a year, and it is still not 2/3 of everything forever, because forever is not a number you can beat with a good month. So I stop trying to beat the number, and I start looking at the man. 29 days of running at a wall, and when the answer comes, it is so simple that I sit down in the ash outside my own door and put my head in my hands. Aldrich does not want gold. Perrin told me so himself, and I was too busy being frightened to hear it. He said the king wants the arrangement. He said the histories will say His Majesty planted a colony in Dragon Country. A man who wanted gold would have taken the gold. A man who wants the histories has to be there. He has to be seen doing it, in the place, with the dragons in the background, or the story does not work. And the day he stands in my house, the scroll stops mattering. He is a player. He is a man in a room in front of an audience, and I have spent 2 years learning exactly what to do with one of those. I write him a letter that evening. It takes me 4 hours and 11 drafts, and Silvara reads every one of them and takes 8 of them off me and burns them instead of arguing with me. The letter that goes west is short. I accept the crown claim in full. I ask only that His Majesty come in person to receive the first payment and set his hand on the house, since a steward is a poor thing to put in the histories. I add one line at the end, and it is the only line that matters, and Silvara is the one who tells me to put it in. I write that the ancient dragons of the ash wish to see the human king with their own eyes. She says, he will not be able to breathe until he has said yes. She says it flatly, the way she says everything, and she is 940 years old and she has watched a great many creatures fail to resist an audience. The answer comes back in 9 days by a rider with a fresh horse and a face gray from the ash. The king of the west will come himself. He will bring his court. He will arrive on the 59th day. I read it twice and hand it to Bran, who reads it and hands it to Morella, who cannot read. So she looks at the seal and says, "That is a big seal," and then she goes to work out how to feed 40 soft westerners. At night, I do not sleep at all. I sit in the empty hall with one lamp, and I lay out the whole thing, hand by hand, out loud to nobody, until I can hear where it breaks. He is a king, so he cannot be seen to be afraid. He is coming for the histories, so he needs an audience, and the audience will be 100 ancient monsters. He believes I am a card dealer he threw away, so he will not respect me until it is too late. And Rule 1 says the stake is named out loud before the cards move, which means whatever we play for, he will have to say it in front of every creature on this continent, in his own voice, with his own mouth. I go over it until the lamp burns out, and then I go over it in the dark. I do not have a plan yet. What I have is a table, an audience, and a proud man walking towards both of them. Silvara finds me there at dawn with my head on the felt. She does not wake me gently. She puts a cup of water down hard enough to make me sit up and says, "If you die of tiredness before he arrives, I will be extremely annoyed." Then she sits down across the table from me in the gray light, and she picks up the deck, and she starts to deal, and she says, "Come on, if he is coming, then we practice. I will be the king. Try to take something off me." We play for 3 hours. She is better than me. She beats me 11 times out of 19, and every time she does, she tells me exactly what I did wrong, in a flat voice, without any mercy at all. And somewhere in the middle of it, I look up at a 900-year-old dragon wearing the shape of a woman, sitting in my hall at dawn, teaching me how to survive the man who threw me away, and I have to put my cards down for a moment. She asks what is wrong. I say, nothing. She says, your face is doing something. I say, my face is fine. She looks at me for slightly too long, and then she picks up the deck and shuffles it, and I watch a pair of hands that could not hold a card 2 years ago move like water, and neither of us says anything else about it. 12 days later, a column of 40 horses comes over the western ridge under a banner with a crown on it, and every dragon on the continent is sitting on the rocks above my house to watch it come. King Aldrich of the West comes into the Ashlands on a white horse with a cloth of gold over its back, and the horse is so frightened it has to be led by 2 men the whole way. There are 40 in his party. Paran with his box, 9 priests of the summoning in white, a dozen lords who have clearly been told this will be the making of their names, and soldiers who look at the rocks and say nothing, because the rocks are full. 160 of them are up there, on every ridge above my house, sitting in the sun with their wings folded, watching a line of horses come across the flat. None of them make a sound. That is what does it. If they had roared, Aldrich could have been brave. Instead, 160 ancient monsters watch him ride the last mile in complete silence, and by the end of it, his hands are white on the reins. Meet him in front of the house with my people behind me. Bran on the left, Morella with her hands in her apron, Tam holding the token box because he asked to, Silvara in her human shape at my right shoulder. I bow. Properly, all the way down, because the whole night depends on this man believing he is exactly what he thinks he is. Aldrich looks down at me from the horse and says he is pleased to see the crown's investment has flourished. Investment. I keep my face still and I thank him for the honor of his visit. Then I show him the house, because he is dying to see it and cannot ask. I walk him down the long hall and I explain every game, and he is charmed and he does not hide it well. He pulls the lever on a machine. 3 flames come up. 10 tokens drop into the tray with a noise like coins on a plate, and the King of the West laughs out loud in front of his own court. He watches the wheel spin twice. He asks how the green pocket works, and I explain it exactly, honestly, out loud, the way I explain it to everyone, and I watch him do the arithmetic and get it wrong. He says, so the odds are near enough even. And I say, near enough, Majesty, and behind me, Silvara makes a small sound in her throat that only I can hear. Then he holds his ceremony, because that is what he came for. The court arranges itself in my hall. Paran unrolls the scroll. The priests stand in a line and look holy, and 160 dragons put their heads under the front of my roof to watch. Aldrich makes a speech about the reach of his crown and the taming of the eastern waste. He is good at it. He has a voice for halls. He says that where his ancestors sent armies, he sent one clever servant with a deck of cards. I stand there and take it, and I keep my hands folded, and Bran beside me is breathing through his nose in a way I have learned to notice. Then the king finishes his speech and does the thing that ends him, and he does it casually, as an afterthought, the way men like him always do the worst thing on the list. He turns to Perrin and says that since the crown is taking the house under its hand, the crown's law comes with it, and the condemned who were delivered to this place remain condemned and will be returned to the tithe. Perrin says it is already noted. 2 soldiers step towards Morella. One of them puts a hand on Tam's shoulder, and the token box goes down on the stone and breaks open, and white tokens go everywhere across my floor. The hall goes very quiet, and I hear a sound behind me that I have never heard in 2 years. 160 dragons breathing in at the same time. They do not move. They are pledged against harming my people, not against watching it happen. And I built that hole in my own contract with my own hands, and now I am standing in it. I ask the king for a moment. He grants it generously in front of everyone, and I walk out of my own hall into the ash, and I stand in front of the black wall where the rules are cut, and I ask him to come and read something. He comes, because a king cannot refuse to walk 20 paces in front of an audience. His whole court comes. The dragons turn their heads. I ask him to read the 5th rule aloud. He looks at me. I look back at him with my hands at my sides, and I say, please, Majesty, read it out. It is not long. He reads it. No living thing is ever a stake in this house. Not a slave, not a servant, not a wife, not a child, not a prisoner. And I say, loudly enough that the ridge can hear me, that those 11 were bought and paid for 2 springs ago with a seat at my table, that they are members of this house, and that they are not stakes and not stock and not tithe. Aldrich says the crown's law does not stop at a wall with scratches on it. And I say, no, it stops where I stop paying. And I ask him whether he would like to test which of those 2 things the system recognizes tonight. That is a bluff. I want to be honest about it. The system recognizes his claim, and I have no idea whether it recognizes my wall, and if he had called it, everything would have ended right there in the ash. He does not call it. He does something far better for me, which is that he gets angry. He says he did not ride 9 days to argue with a dealer of cards about scratches on a rock. He says the crown will have its due. And then he says, in front of his court and the dragons and my own people, that I should be grateful he did not simply have me hanged in the first place. And I say, then let us settle it the way this house settles everything. One night, at the wheel, your claim against my rule. Nobody breathes. Perrin actually says, Majesty, no, out loud, in front of the entire court, and I watch the blood go out of his face while he says it, because nobody tells Aldrich no twice. Because now 160 dragons are watching a human king decide whether he is afraid of a wooden wheel. Aldrich can feel every eye on the back of his neck. He has been feeling them since the ridge. He says yes. Of course he says yes, and his own court hears him say it. We set the terms out loud, because Rule 1, and I make him say every word of them himself, so the system hears it in his own voice. The first stake is the small one, his tithe against my knight's take. If the crown wins, the 11 go back in the cart. If the house wins, the border tithe ends forever, and no condemned man is ever sent east again. He agrees fast, because he is thinking about the big one, and because 11 prisoners cost him nothing at all. That is how I want him thinking. Small, fast, cheap, and moving. Then I say, and if the tithe falls, we play the claim. His 2/3, forever, against everything the house holds tonight. One night. Sit down when you like, stand up when you like. Aldrich of the West, standing in a stone hall in Dragon Country with an audience he has waited his whole reign for, says, done, and puts his hand on the rim of my wheel. Here is the thing I know that he does not. No trick and nothing up my sleeve. It is the only thing I have ever really owned. One spin is a coin toss with a shaved edge. Anybody can beat one spin. If he had bet the whole claim on one spin and walked away, I would have been an even chance to lose everything I have built. I do not need one spin. I need 40. Over 40 spins, that green pocket turns into plain arithmetic, and arithmetic is not luck, and arithmetic has never once been talked out of anything. So the entire night is one job. Keep him at the table. Every other thing I do is in service of that. Not one word of it is a lie, and the whole of it is a trap, and I have known how to do that since I was 19. I make it easy for him to stay. I put a chair at the wheel, a proper one with a back, because a man who is comfortable will sit for hours. Morella brings food to his court and to nobody else, so leaving means leaving the good table. I let him choose the spin. I let him call the ball. I let him hold the ball and drop it himself on the 4th spin, and his court makes a noise like a crowd at a fair, and after that, he will not let anyone else touch it, and I let him win. That is not generosity, and it is not strategy. That is simply what happens, and my whole job is to stand there and let it happen and pay him with a straight face. Takes 11 straight up on the 2nd spin, and I count out 3,500 scales in tokens onto the cloth in front of him. His court claps. He does not look at the tokens. He looks at the dragons on the ridge to check that they saw. By midnight, King Aldrich is 9,000 scales ahead, and he has stopped hearing anything anybody says to him. Perrin tries once. He leans in and says something about the hour and about the road home, and Aldrich waves him off without turning his head, and Perrin steps back and does not try again. I have watched a man do that at 4 in the morning in a basement behind a station, and I have watched my own father do it at a kitchen table, and it is exactly the same movement of the hand, and rank makes no difference to it at all. At the 9th spin after midnight, the ball drops in the green pocket and the whole cloth goes to the house, and the King of the West sits back and laughs and says, well, there it is, and calls for a bigger stake. And that is where it starts going wrong for him, and he cannot feel it yet. He drops back to level by the 18th spin. He goes 4,000 down by the 22nd. He puts a hand out and moves his own tokens back onto the number 11, twice as much, because 11 paid him once, and he has decided that 11 belongs to him. There is no 11. There is no number that belongs to anybody. I say so, out loud, on the record, in front of his court, because Rule 1 is Rule 1, and because I want the ridge to hear me say it. He tells me to spin the wheel and mind my own business, and his court finds the floor very interesting. By the 3rd hour of the morning, Aldrich has lost the tithe. It goes on a spin that lands black 17, and he does not even notice, because he is already counting what he has left. The window opens over the wheel in red letters and reads the settlement out for everyone. The border tithe of the Western Kingdom ended by wager in perpetuity. My people are free by the arithmetic of a wheel. Rella sits down on the floor of her own kitchen. Bran does not move at all, and then he puts one hand over his eyes for about 2 seconds, and then he is a sergeant again, and Aldrich does not care. That is what makes me hate him. 11 human lives and 600 years of tribute change hands, and the King of the West keeps his eyes on the wheel and asks whether we are going to play the claim now or waste the night. So we play the claim, and he starts well. They always start well. He is up 7,000 inside a quarter of an hour, and he tells his court, without turning round, that the trick of it is to feel the run. Then the wheel does what the wheel does. 37 pockets, 35 paid. The same shape comes up on every spin all night long, and the king cannot see it, because nobody ever sees the shape of a thing from inside the chair. The 40th spin, he is level. At the 50th, he is 14,000 down, and he has bet his own rings, which I take, and a title deed to a manor at Redwater, which I take. At the 58th spin, with the sun coming gray over the ridge and 160 dragons who have not moved all night, King Aldrich of the West puts the crown claim on the number 11, straight up, all of it, to get out. I ask him to name the stake aloud, as the rule requires. He does. His voice cracks in the middle of it, and he has to say the last part twice. Spin the wheel. He drops the ball because he still will not let anyone else touch it. It runs the rim, and it falls, and it bounces twice, and it stops in the green pocket. The window opens in red over my wheel, and it is the largest one anybody there has ever seen, and it hangs in the air of my hall long enough for every creature on the ridge to read it twice. Wager settled. Loser, Aldrich, King of the Western Kingdom. Stake, the crown claim upon the works and gains of the summoned, entire, collection by force. Claim extinguished. I feel it go. That is the strangest thing about the whole night. Something that has been sitting on my chest for 59 days simply lifts off and is gone, and I have to put a hand on the wheel to stay upright. King of the West stands up out of the chair very slowly. He looks at his empty cloth, and then at his court, and then at me, and then a dragon laughs. I do not know which one starts it. It does not matter. It goes along the ridge like fire in a dry field, 160 of them, and it is the first time in the history of this world that dragons have laughed at a human king. Aldrich hears it. He will hear it for the rest of his life. I stand at my wheel and I do not say one word, because there is nothing I could add and because I promised myself, on a straw bed in an empty hall, that this would happen in money in front of witnesses. He calls for his horse. His court gathers itself in absolute silence. Perrin picks up the box and does not look at anyone. I stop the king at the door, not to gloat. I hand him back the deed to the manor at Redwater, in front of everyone, and I tell him plainly that the house does not want a house, and that the debt between us is paid in full and closed. He takes it, and he says the only true thing he says all night. He says, "You will not be able to stop." He says, "Men who build these do not stop, and one day you will look up and there will be nobody left to play with." Then he rides west with 40 horses and no claim, and I stand in my doorway and watch the banner go over the ridge, and Silvara says quietly beside me that he was not entirely wrong. 2 days later, on the road home, King Aldrich of the West stops his column and calls for a scribe and dictates one short letter. It is not addressed to any human. It goes east and south to the Fire Mountains in the hands of a man who is paid enough that his family will not miss him. It says that a human sits in the ash growing fat on the hordes of dragons. It says that 11 great chambers of ancient gold now lie behind a wooden hall belonging to a creature the length of a king's arm, and that the dragons who guard him are the ones he has already emptied. 3 days east and south, on a burning mountain, a clerk gets 4 lines into that letter before the king of the dragons takes it off him with one claw and reads the rest of it himself. Ignis has not left his mountain in 90 years. He has heard about the wooden hall for 2 of them, from Caldric, who came home in disgrace, and from 100 others who went east and came back thinner in the hoard and strange in the eye. Then he stands up. Not one creature in that hall has ever seen him do it, and half of them go down on their faces out of fright, and he walks over them to the mouth of the mountain and says, "Tell the ash the king is coming to see the little game himself." Back east, I am asleep for the first time in 4 days, and the first I know about any of it is when the light changes. I wake up because my window has gone the wrong color. The ash outside is orange. There is no sun in that quarter of the sky at this hour, and the stone under my hand is warm, and somewhere out on the plain 160 dragons are getting off the rocks at once. Tam is in my doorway with his eyes enormous. He says, "Sir, there is a mountain coming." Tam is wrong. It is not a mountain. It is worse, because a mountain would at least hold still. Ignis comes in from the west across the flat at the height of a low cloud, and the ash under him lifts and turns to glass, and the line of glass follows him all the way to my door like a road being laid down behind a cart. He is the color of the bottom of a fire, not red. Red is Varos. He is white and orange down the middle and dull at the edges, the way coals go, and looking straight at him makes my eyes water at 400 paces. Every dragon on the ridge goes flat. 160 of the oldest creatures in the world put their chins in the ash and their wings over their heads, and Osera the Grey goes down with the rest of them. He lands 300 paces out, and even at that distance, the heat takes the pitch out of my roof beams and sets the whole front of my hall smoking. 300 paces is him being polite. Bran gets the humans out the back. Morella will not go, so Bran picks her up. Tam I send with them, and he goes, which he would not have done a year ago, and I am grateful for that for the rest of my life. Silvara does not go. She stands in the doorway of the counting room, in her human shape with her arms folded, and when I look at her, she says, "If you send me out, I will simply come back in, so save your breath." Then the king of the dragons speaks, and the sound of it moves the stones in my wall. He says my name. Not the human, not the dealer. My name, both parts of it. And hearing Kaito Mori come out of a creature the size of a hill nearly puts me on my knees before he has said anything at all. He says he has been told there is a man in the ash who owns the hordes of 11 great lines, and that the man is soft and small and has no magic and no sword, and that this is either the largest lie ever told or the most interesting thing to happen in 900 years. I say it is true, and I say it out loud, and I do not decorate it. 11 chambers under contract, 490,000 scales in the room behind me, and 160 names in the ledger. Ignis is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "Give it back. All of it. Every scale, every contract, tonight, and then walk west and never come into the ash again, and I will let the small ones live." And there it is, and it is the oldest thing there is. Hand me what you have, or I kill you. Aldrich needed 2 years and a sealed scroll to say that to me. This one says it standing in my yard in a single breath. I ask him one question, and I ask it because if I am about to be turned into a smear on my own floor, I would rather be a smear that asked. I say, "Why did you come yourself?" He does not answer. So I say the rest of it, and my voice is doing something strange, because my throat is drying out in the heat coming off him, and I have to swallow twice in the middle. I say, "You did not fly 3 days to burn a wooden shed. Caldric could have burned it. Any of the ones lying on that ridge could have burned it. You came because something new happened on your continent, and you wanted to see it with your own eyes." Plane goes very quiet. Somewhere behind me, a beam in my roof cracks in the heat and falls. Then Ignis says, in a voice that has gone quieter and is somehow much worse, that he has not left his mountain in 90 years, and that he did not leave it for gold, because he is lying on more gold than exists anywhere else in the world. He says, "I have eaten kings. I have burned 3 cities that are not on any map, because there is nobody left to draw them. I have slept through the rise and the fall of your entire kingdom twice." And then he says, "And every one of those things was exactly like the one before it. And I have come to find out whether the small thing in the wooden hall is different." I stand in front of him with my hands at my sides, and I think very clearly that I have been waiting for this customer for 2 years without knowing his name. I tell him the house is open at dusk. He asks whether I am giving the King of the Dragons an appointment. I say yes, and that the house does not open early for anyone, and that this is the whole reason it is worth coming to. Ignis looks at me for a long time. Then he goes up, and he lands on the ridge above my house, and he lies down across the whole top of it and does not move again, and the rock under him glows dull red until sundown. We have 9 hours. I spend the first one throwing up behind the bunkhouse, and the second one with Bran, working out how to open a hall whose front wall is on fire. And in the 3rd hour, Osera the Grey comes down off the ridge and asks to speak to me privately, and everything I think I know about the last 4 months turns over. She does not come inside. She puts her head near the smoking doorway, and she says, in that dry paper voice, that before the king plays, she would like to settle a small matter of business, since after tonight there may be no one to settle it with. I say, "Name it." She says, "The Deepstone Mountain." She asks whether I intend to redeem it before the term runs out, because the term runs out in 20 days, and she does not want the mountain, and she has never wanted it. I stand there in the heat with my mouth open like a fool, and I say, "What mountain?" And Osera the Grey, who has never put a single scale on my cloth in 2 years, looks at me for a long moment and says, "Ah, she did not tell you." Then she tells me. The night Andrasa the Copper broke the bank, when Silvara walked out of the hall and said the house would pay in full, she flew west for 20 minutes and woke Osara up out of the deep rock. She signed over the Deepstone Mountain. Not a chamber, not a gallery. The mountain. The hall of her line, 900 years of it, the place her mother is buried, and her mother's mother, everything her family has ever been. 9,000 scales, at 60 days, redeemable in full, and she made Osera swear not to tell me, and Osera swore, because a dragon takes an oath seriously, and because, she says, she wanted to see what I would do when I found out on my own. I ask her why. Osera says, "Ask her," and puts her head back up into the smoke. So I go and find Silvara in the counting room, and I am shaking, and I do not know whether it is fear or rage or the other thing, and I put both hands flat on the table, and I ask her whether it is true. She says yes, immediately. No excuse, no softening, the way she does everything, and then she goes back to counting tokens, and nobody has ever infuriated me more than that. I ask her why she did not tell me, and she puts the tokens down and gives me the honest answer, and it is worse than any lie she could have picked. She says, "Because you would have paid it back first. Before the wages, before the roof, before the food, you would have emptied the room to clear it, and then the next Andrasa would have walked in and the house would have died, and I have watched you build this thing." She says, "You had 36 days and a king coming and 11 people who could be put back in a cage. You did not need one more number on your chest. So I carried it, and I would carry it again. And stop looking at me like that." I sit down on the floor of my own counting room with my back against the strongbox, and what comes up in me is not gratitude, not at first. What comes up is the thing I have been outrunning for 2 years. I say, "I did this. Everything you have lost, you lost to me. The West Gallery, the mountain, your sister's son sleeping under a rock with nothing. My machine ate your entire family, and I stood behind it and counted the take. She does not tell me it is not my fault. She never lies to make anybody feel better. She says, yes, some of it, and the rest of it we did to ourselves for 400 years before you ever fell out of that cart. Then she says, you told me your father was eaten by a machine, and then you built a bigger one, and you have been standing beside it ever since, telling yourself that at least yours is honest. And she says, the worst of it is that yours is honest. You name every price. You pay every winner. You put a ceiling on the tables when a gray old woman asked you to, and it still ate my mother's haul. I ask her what she wants me to do, and she says the only thing she has ever asked me for in 2 years, and it is not the mountain. She says, when the king sits down tonight, do not do to him what you did to Aldrich. She says, Aldrich earned it. Ignis has 911 names in his reach. If you empty him the way you emptied the West, they all fall with him. Tell her I do not know how to sit at a table and not win. She says, I know, that is exactly what frightens me. Then she gets up and goes to open the shutters, and over her shoulder she says, redeem my mountain first, before the wages, before the roof. And then she says, and if you die tonight, I will never forgive you, and she goes out. I sit on that floor for a long time, and then I get up and I do the only useful thing a man in my position can do, which is work out precisely how tonight has to go. Go and get the ledger, and I sit at the wheel with a lamp, and I write out what I owe. Not what I am owed, what I owe. I have been careful not to make that list for 2 years. 9,000 scales and a mountain to Selvara. 400 already paid to Varos and the wound he took across his flank, which no gold pays for. A wage and a room to Tam, who was 13 and in a cage. Morella's kitchen, twice. 11 pawn contracts on 11 hoards. Every one of them signed by a creature who wanted tokens more than it wanted its own history. And Mirath, who owns nothing at all now, and who has not come to my door in 11 days. I look at that list until the lamp burns low, and then I turn the ledger over, and on the back of it I write the number that has to come out of tonight for all of it to be paid, and the number is enormous, and I know exactly one way to get it. At dusk they come. Not 160, 240, from ends of the continent I have never had a name for, and the ash for a mile in every direction is full of them, and half of them come in human shape. I have never seen more than 3 at once do it. Tonight there are more than 100 men and women standing in my hall in coats that are not cloth, shoulder to shoulder, packed in around the wheel, because in that shape they can get close enough to see. They are all beautiful, and all slightly wrong. Nobody blinks enough. Andrasa the Copper wears the shape of a broad woman with copper rings up both arms, and she takes the seat at my card table, like she has always owned it. Sareth is a thin man in green with a knife face. Varos is a huge red-bearded man who cannot stop touching things. Kaldrek is here too, in black, standing at the back, and he does not meet my eye all night. Morella feeds 200 creatures who do not eat. Bran runs a floor with 4 men and a boy. Tam moves through a crowd of dragons in human skin with a box of tokens on his hip, and nobody touches him. That is a rule 91 of them agreed to in 11 minutes, and every name that has come to my door since has signed it standing up before it was allowed to sit down. Silvara stands at the wheel in her long dark coat with her hands behind her back, and she is the only one in the room who is not looking at the door. And at full dark, the ridge above my house goes cold for the first time in 9 hours, and a shadow comes down the glass road, and the king of the dragons walks into my hall in the shape of a man. He is small. That is the first shock. He is a lean man in a plain dark coat, black hair going gray, ordinary in every way except that the room bends away from him without meaning to. The eyes do not change. They never change. His are the color of the inside of a furnace, and when he looks at me, I feel the heat of the ridge all over again in a room where nothing is burning. He looks at the wheel for a long moment. Then he sits down in the chair I put there for a king who is not this one, and he says very quietly, teach me the game. So I teach the king of the dragons how to lose money, and I do it honestly, out loud, in front of 240 witnesses, the way I have done it since the first morning on the flat rock. I show him the 37 pockets. I show him that a straight number pays 35 for one. I put my finger on the green pocket and I tell him that this one belongs to the house and pays nobody, ever. He looks at it for about 3 heartbeats. Then he says, so the wheel is a tax with a wheel attached, and every creature in the hall who has been playing here for 2 years goes very quiet. I say, yes, Majesty, that is exactly what it is. And he says, and they all know. And I say, every one of them. It is cut into the wall by the door in letters as deep as my hand. Then Ignis smiles, and it is the first time I see it, and it does not look like a human smile at all. He says, and they come anyway. Good. Then it is not a swindle. It is a test. And I have not been tested in 900 years. Court brings the stake in. It takes them an hour, 11 of them in human shape carrying sacks that no human shoulder could lift, and the pile behind my house grows by half again while the hall stands and watches. He starts on red and black, the safe bets, the ones that pay 1 for 1, because he is old and careful and he wants the shape of the thing under him before he trusts it. He wins 11 of the first 14. Of course he does. And the hall makes a noise every time, and by the 9th of them, there are 240 ancient monsters shouting at a wooden wheel like men at a dog race. Silvara spins. I stand at her shoulder and I run the count in my head and I keep my face empty because the house is bleeding and the house must never look like it is bleeding. By the second hour, Ignis is 9,000 scales ahead and he has stopped bothering with red and black. He is placing straight numbers now, 4 and 5 at a time, the way they always do when the safe bets start to feel slow. By the fourth hour, he has given it all back and taken it again and given it back again. And the pile in front of him is smaller than it was, and he has not said a word in 40 minutes. And then Bran walks up to the wheel with the ledger under his arm and puts his finger on a line in it and says, in the flat voice of a sergeant who has decided to die well, that His Majesty is at the limit for tonight. The whole hall stops. 240 faces turn to look at a scarred human with a book. Ignis says, "What limit?" I take him outside. I walk the king of the dragons out of my own house and along the black wall in the dark, and I put my hand on the 8th rule, and I read it to him myself. No player may lose more than 500 scales in one night at this house. When you reach it, you are done, and the doors open again at dusk tomorrow. He reads it twice. Then he says, quietly, that he could put this building and everyone in it under the ash in the time it takes me to breathe in. I say, yes. And then the rule would still be true, and there would be nothing behind it, and no reason for anybody to have ever come here at all. Ignis stands in front of that wall for a long time, and then the king of the dragons, who has eaten kings and burned cities that are not on any map, says, very well, tomorrow at dusk, and he goes. He comes back the next night, and the one after that, and the one after that, and by the 5th of them, nobody in my hall is pretending to be surprised. 19 nights. He is at my door at dusk in the shape of a lean man in a dark coat before some of the regulars have even arrived, and twice I catch him waiting on the ridge before sundown, pretending to look at the sky. 19 nights, 500 scales a night. 9,500 in total, which is nothing at all to him. He is on his hands and knees for a beetle, and the beetle is the fact that he cannot have it whenever he wants it. That is the ceiling. That is what a limit does, and I did not build it for this, and I will never fully forgive myself for how well it works. The ash changes in those 19 nights. It stops being a plain with a hall on it and starts being a town. 200 of them are living around my house now, most of them in human shape, because in that shape they can sit in a chair and lean on a rail and stand in a queue, and they have discovered that they like all three. Morella is feeding 100 a night. Bran has 14 humans on the floor, all of them off the last tithe carts, all of them on wages. Tam has an assistant. Tam is 15 and has an assistant. Merchants start coming east, which nobody expected because there are only so many nights you can watch dragons in human coats hand over gold before somebody in a border town works out that gold has to go somewhere. The first one is the farmer, the actual farmer, the one Sareth carried off 2 springs ago and brought back. He walks over the ridge with a mule and 11 crates of dried apples and a face like a man walking into a lion pit on purpose. He sells the lot in 1 hour at a price that makes him sit down. Then he asks whether he may come back in the spring, and I tell him he may come back whenever he likes and that the house will buy every apple in his county. On the 12th night, in the quiet hour before the doors open, I settle a debt of my own, and it is the one that has been sitting on my chest since Osara put her gray head in my door. I take 9,000 scales out of the room, 750 a night across 12 nights. 500 of that the king's own ceiling, and the rest a town that did not exist 2 months ago, and it is every scale the house has cleared since he started coming. I fly it west with Varos, and I put it in front of Osara the Grey under her own mountain. She counts it. She takes her time. Then she gives me a slab of gray slate with the mortgage cut into it, and she breaks it in half across her knee like a woman snapping kindling, and says, the deep stone is clear. Bring the 2 halves back, and I put them on the counting table in front of Silvara, without saying anything, because I have been rehearsing a speech for 2 days, and every version of it is terrible. She looks at the broken slate for a long moment. Then she says, you paid it before the roof and before the wages. I say, you told me to. She says, I did not think you would listen, and her voice does something at the end of that sentence. Then she puts both hands flat on the table and looks at me and says, why? And I do not have a clever answer, so I tell her the truth, which is that it is her mother's hall and that I could not stand it. She says, that is not a business reason. I say no. She says, say the other one. And I stand there with my hands on a broken mortgage slab, and I cannot make my mouth work at all. So she takes pity on me for the first time since I have known her, and she says, all right, later then. And she picks up the tokens and goes to open the wheel, and my ears are burning like a boy's. Later that same night, she stands next to me at the rim and says, without looking over, that when this is finished, she is going to teach me to fly. Not to carry me. To fly. I say that sounds impossible. She says most things I have done sound impossible, and that she has thought about it, and that she does not intend to spend the next 40 years watching me walk everywhere like a beetle. 40 years. She says the number and moves straight on without waiting for an answer, and then she calls the table, and I stand there and do arithmetic of a completely different kind for the rest of the night. On the 20th night, Ignis brings his whole reach with him, and I know before he has finished landing that the shape of this one is going to be different. Not 240, 400. Every great line under the Fire Mountains, all of them in human shape, packed into my hall and out through the front and standing in the ash under the lamps. Andrasa the Copper, Sareth. Varos with his scar on his door, Kaldrek at the back in black. Mirith, who has come back at last, thin and quiet, standing behind his aunt and touching nothing. Sarah the Grey, who has never played, standing at the wall by the 8th rule with her arms folded, watching me and not the wheel. Ignis sits down and says, "Tonight the ceiling comes off," and I say no in front of 400 of them, and my voice does not shake, and I am proud of that even now. I say Rule 8 stands for the king the same as for the smallest whelp in the room. He says he will pay for the privilege. I say the house does not sell rules. He says he will buy the house. I tell him the house is not for sale, and that if it were, the wall would come with it and he would be standing exactly where he is standing now. And then Ignis smiles that smile again, and I feel the floor go out from under my whole life. Because he says the rule counts scales. It says nothing about anything else. He is right. I read it every day for 4 months and I never saw it. I wrote a ceiling on gold because gold was the only thing I could imagine anybody putting on my cloth. He says, "I will not wager 1 scale tonight," and then he names his first stake, and the room makes a sound like a building settling. He stakes the tribute of the Fire Mountains, 911 lines, every gift and toll and offering that has come up that mountain for 600 years, against the take of my house. I look at Selvara, she looks back at me, and her face says everything she said in the counting room, and I say the words anyway, because Rule 1 is Rule 1 and because I cannot see a door. I say, the stake is named, and the house accepts. He wins the first one. He wins the second. On the third, he loses, and 6 centuries of tribute go into a red window in the air and out of his hands, and he does not even look up. That is when I understand what I am actually dealing with tonight. He is not chasing gold. He is not chasing the tribute. He is chasing the feeling he had on the 14th spin of the first night, when he did not know what would happen next. At midnight, he has lost the tribute, the northern reaches, the salt flats, and the right to name the heir of his own line. By the 2nd hour of the morning, he has lost the Fire Mountains themselves. 400 dragons in human shape stand in my hall and watch their king put his home on a cloth and lose it on Black 17, and not one of them makes a sound. Their eyes are red, all of them. 20 nights of no sleep and hot lamps and standing shoulder to shoulder, and they look like men at the end of a war. There are empty sacks all over my floor. Tam cannot pick them up fast enough. Ignis puts both hands flat on the rim of my wheel, and he says, quietly, that by the law of his own kind, a king without a reach is not a king, and that he now owns nothing, and that he cannot go home because there is no home to go to. Then he names the last stake, and the hall goes so quiet that I can hear the lamps. He says, the ash. All of it. Every mountain, every reach, every hoard, every creature that breathes inside its borders, from the western boundary stone to the gray sea, the continent entire, and the fealty of everything on it, against everything the house holds. 1 spin, 1 number, straight up 35 for 1, because that is the only bet on my wheel that pays enough to give him his life back. And I say no. I say it fast and flat, and I mean it, and the reason is cut into the black wall beside my own door. Rule 5. No living thing is ever a stake in this house. I say, take what you have left and go home, Majesty. There is nothing left in this for you. The house is closed. Ignis does not shout. He says, quietly, that he has nothing left to go home to, and that if I refuse him, he will put this hall and everyone in it under the ash tonight, and take the loss as paid, because a creature with nothing left does not need a reason. And he says, and you know that I mean it, and you also know something worse, which is that some part of you wants to see the ball drop. He is right. That is the thing I have to live with. Standing in my own hall with 400 lives on the floor, some part of me is not afraid at all. Some part of me is leaning forward. So I do the only clean thing available to me, which is to name the terms out loud and make them heavy. But I say the other thing first because 400 of them are standing on my floor and every one of them can read that wall. I say Rule 5. I cut that one deeper than any of the others. I say, I made a human king stand where you are standing and rate it back to me. Tonight every creature in the ash goes on my cloth and I deal it anyway. That is me stepping over my own line, and I want it heard before the ball moves. Then I name the terms. I say, if the house wins, no hoard is stripped, no hall is taken, no creature is moved off its own ground. They keep everything they hold. Asara says, from the wall, that she asked me once for a ceiling, and I told her grown creatures may choose for themselves. She says, none of us is choosing tonight. You are, and we are the stake. I say, and no living thing on this continent may ever again be eaten by anything on it or taken as tribute by anything off it. That goes into the wager, or there is no wager. Ignis looks at me for a long moment. Then he says, you are asking me to sell the whole of what we are for 1 spin of a wooden wheel. And I say, no, Majesty, you are the one selling. I am the one writing down the price so that everybody in this room hears it before the ball drops. He says, done. The system writes it. The window that opens over my wheel is the size of the front wall of my house, and it takes a long time to finish, and every creature in the hall reads it twice. Chooses his number. He does not hesitate. He puts the whole thing on the number 1, and he says, because that is what I have been for 900 years, and it is the first joke I have ever heard him make. Selvara looks at me. I nod. She spins the wheel. I drop the ball myself because he will not touch it, and I have thought about that many times since. He would not touch it. The one time it truly mattered, the king of the dragons would not put his hand on it. The ball runs the rim. It runs for a long time. It is the longest sound I have ever heard in my life, and the hall does not breathe. And Osera does not look at the wheel once. She looks only at me. It drops. It bounces off the fret between 4 and 21. It bounces again, high, and comes down on the far side, and it rattles, and it settles. The ball stops in the green pocket. Nobody moves. 400 of the oldest creatures in the world stand in a wooden hall in the ash and stare at a small black ball sitting in a green slot that pays nobody, and my ears are ringing. Then the red window opens over the wheel, and it is so bright that the lamps go pale, and the letters in it are the size of doors. Wager settled. Loser, Ignis, king of the ash. Stake. The ash continent entire, and the fealty of every creature within its borders. Collection by force under absolute debt. Title of the ash continent transferred to the player, Kaito Mori. All creatures within the borders are now vassals of the holder. Terms of the wager stand and cannot be altered. And then 400 dragons go down onto one knee at the same time. Not because they choose to. I see it happen, and I see their faces while it happens. And Andrasa the Copper is fighting it with everything she has and going down anyway. Ignis kneels last. He is the only one who does it slowly, and he is the only one who does it on purpose. And when he is down, he looks up at me from the floor of my own hall with those furnace eyes. Pot is still on the cloth. His court brought it in over 20 nights and never took it home. There are things in it that should not be in a wooden building. A spear made of a single tooth black that hums when I put my hand near it. A crown of gray metal with nothing set in it at all. Osera looks at that crown and tells me it was made before there were any humans to make crowns for. A scale the size of a table, so old it has gone the color of glass, and 11 sealed jars that even Silvara will not open, and a book with no writing in it that turns its own pages when the wind comes through the door. I rake it in. That is my trade, and my hands do it without asking me. Rake, stack, count, and set the cloth clean for the next one, the way I have done 10,000 times in 2 worlds. And then I look down at the king of the dragons kneeling in my house, and I say the only thing there is to say, and I say it quietly because the hall is silent and it carries. I say, sorry, lizard, the house always wins. I own a continent for about 4 minutes before I understand that I have made something terrible. 400 of them are on one knee on my floor and in the ash outside my door, and they are not doing it because they lost. They are doing it because the system has its hand on the back of their necks. Andrasa the Copper is shaking with the effort of trying to stand up. Sareth has his head down and his eyes are furious. Veros, who took a wound across his whole flank for me, is kneeling in my doorway and cannot help it. I say, get up. Nothing happens. I say it louder. Nothing happens, and the window in the air says calmly that vassals remain at the disposal of the holder. So I say it as an order. I say, on my word as the holder, every creature of the ash stands up and goes where it likes. And they stand up. All of them, at once, and the sound of 400 of them getting off their knees is the worst sound I have ever heard, because it happened when I said so. That is the moment I stop feeling clever. I have spent 2 years telling myself that everything in my house was chosen out loud in front of witnesses, and now I am holding a leash that 400 creatures cannot take off. Sarah comes to me before dawn. I ask her the only question I care about, which is how I give it back. She tells me there is no giving back. The system does not have a door for that. What is held is held. She says, you may only decide what kind of holder you are. And then she says, and that is the same choice every one of us was given when we were the ones on top. And almost none of us chose well. So I do the only thing I have ever known how to do with a problem too big to lift. I open at dusk. The doors go open on schedule. Bran calls the tables. Morella lights the ovens. Tam runs tokens. The wheel turns for the first spin of the night at the usual hour, and the ash comes in and plays, and nobody knows what else to do either. And in between hands, over the next season, I pay every debt in the ledger. Out loud, in front of the whole house, one at a time, because a debt paid quietly is a debt the room never learns from. 11 pond hoards go back. All of them. I stand at the door on 11 separate nights and hand each contract to its owner and break the slate over the rail, and each time the hall makes a noise like a wave. I do not give them away. I have not gone soft, and a gift would have shamed them. Each hoard goes back against a season of work in the house, at wages, doing something useful, and every one of them takes the deal inside a minute. Sareth counts the take. He has a mind like a set of scales, and he is insufferable about it. Andrasa runs the second wheel, and she is better at it than I am, and she knows. Mirith gets his west chamber back on the same terms as everyone else, and he is the only one I put a condition on. He may work any table in the house. He may never place a stake in it again as long as he lives. He asks me if that is a punishment. I tell him it is what I would want done to me, and he looks at me for a moment, and then he goes and learns the wheel, and inside a month he is the fastest hand I have. Varos gets his scale back. The first one. The one that came off his shoulder on the first morning on the flat rock, which I have kept in a box for 2 years and never once spent. I do not put it in his hand. I have Bran drill 2 holes in it and I hang it over the front door of the house where every creature that comes in has to walk under it, and I have his name cut into the stone beside it. I tell the hall what it is. The first stake of the first game, lost by the first player, who afterwards stood between me and the king's own hand and took a wound from shoulder to hip for a wooden building. He stands there with his ridiculous red beard in the shape of a man and does not know where to look, and then he goes and takes his post at the door an hour early for the 11th time in 2 years. Brella gets a kitchen of black stone with 2 chimneys and 4 girls under her, and she complains about all of it. Bran gets his name over the second door and a floor of 20. Tam gets wages, a room with a lock, and an assistant of his own. And the tithe road fills up with carts going the wrong way. That is the thing I did not plan and could not have planned. For 600 years, the only traffic on that road went east in chains, and now it goes east with apples. The farmer with the mule brings 11 other men the second season. By the third, there is a market on the flat outside my house on the first day of every month, and humans and dragons stand in it and argue about the price of salt. I watch a creature that ate a village in living memory haggle over a barrel of fish with a woman from a border town who has decided she is not going to be cheated, and I have to go inside and sit down. A letter comes from the west in the second spring. Aldrich wants terms. He has heard what is standing in the ash, and he would like to discuss the crown's relationship with the new power on his eastern border. I answer it in 4 lines. The border stone comes down. The road stays open both ways. No condemned man is ever sent east again, which he agreed to at my wheel in front of 200 witnesses, and which I intend to hold him to forever. And I send him 1 white token in the fold of the letter. 1. Worth 1 gold scale, redeemable at my house on demand, and I write underneath it that this is the fare for a cart ride east, paid in full, and that we are square. He never redeems it. The traders who come east tell me he keeps it in a drawer and takes it out when he has been drinking, and that nobody in the west can work out why their king has a piece of wood he will not spend. Which leaves Ignis, who owns nothing, and who has not left my ridge since the night of the ball. He sits up there in the shape of a man with his coat around his knees, looking west at mountains that are not his anymore, and every creature in the ash walks around the long way to avoid the sight of it. Go up on the 9th day. I sit down on the rock beside the king of the dragons, and neither of us says anything for about an hour, and then I tell him what I have decided. I say, the fire mountains are yours again. Not a gift and not a pardon. You hold them from the house, and the rent is one thing only, and it is the thing you already agreed to at the table. Nothing on this continent eats a person. Not a farmer, not a prisoner, not a thief, not a child in a cart. That is the whole rent forever, and you collect it from every line under you, and if it is ever broken, you answer for it. He is quiet for a long time. Then he says, and that is all. And I say, no. There is a second thing, and it is not rent, it is a job, and you are going to hate it. I tell him about Rule 8. 500 scales in a night and no more. I tell him it is the only rule in my house that has ever cost me money, that a gray old woman asked me for it and I said no, and that I was wrong. And I tell him I want him to keep it. In my house, at my tables, standing behind the chairs. When a player reaches the ceiling, the king of the dragons is the one who taps him on the shoulder and tells him he is finished for tonight. Ignis looks at me, and then he laughs, and it is a horrible sound, and it goes on for a long time. And at the end of it, he says, you are giving the drunk the key to the cellar door. I say, I am giving the one creature in this world who knows exactly what that chair feels like the job of getting people out of it. He does not answer me for a while. Then he says, if I do this, the wall gets a 9th rule, and I write it, and you cut it. I say, name it. Ignis, king of the ash, who lost a continent on a wooden wheel because he could not stand one more identical century, gives me the best rule in my house. 9. Anyone in this house may say the word stop once a night for any player, including themselves, and the table stops, and no creature may mock them for it. I cut it into the black wall myself the next morning, with Osera standing behind me, telling me the letters are crooked, which they are. He takes the job. He is astonishingly good at it. It is a strange thing to watch a 1,000-year-old monster in a plain dark coat put one hand on a duke's shoulder and quietly tell him that his night is over. Nobody argues with him. Not once, in all the years. They argued with me constantly, and in the middle of all of that, somewhere in the second summer, I go west with Silvara to her mother's hall. The deep stone is enormous and cold and very quiet, and it smells of stone dust and old iron, and she walks me down it naming things. Her grandmother's shield, the arch her mother cut, the step where she learned to fly, badly. Third arch is empty. It has been empty since the night the system took the west gallery out of it and put it behind my house, and she does not say anything about it, and I look at that empty room for a long time. It takes 11 trips to bring it back. Varos and Sareth and Andrasa haul most of it, and I ride on Varos with my eyes shut and my hands locked in the straps, and I am sick twice, both times over the salt flats. When it is done, the third arch is full again, and Silvara stands in front of it with her hands behind her back for a very long time, and I stand at the mouth of the hall and let her have it. When she comes out, she does not thank me. She says, that was 3 years of the house's take. I say 4. She says 4 and looks at me, and neither of us says anything else, and that is the whole conversation. 2 nights later, she teaches me to fly, which is to say she carries me and lets go. And it is the single most terrifying thing that has happened to me in this world, including the first morning. There is a set of straps and a wing of stretched hide that Bran builds and that Andrasa improves, and after about 40 attempts, I can hold a line off the ridge for 100 paces before I have to be picked out of the ash. She laughs at me every single time. Properly, out loud, the way she never laughed for the first year I knew her, and I break my collarbone twice, and I would do it again for the sound. On the night I finally land on my own feet at the front of the house, she is waiting at the door under the golden scale, in the shape of a woman, with her arms folded. She says, again, and I say, "First you pay me." And she says, "Name it." And I look at her standing there in the lamplight, and I say, the only thing in 2 worlds I actually want. I say, stay. She says, "I own a mountain and a hall and 900 years of family, and I have spent 4 of them arguing with you about the price of flatbread, and where exactly do you imagine I would go?" And then she takes my hand in front of the whole door queue, which for a creature of the Deepstone line is roughly the same as shouting it off the ridge, and Varos makes a noise like a kettle, and Tam has to go behind the counter. Her name goes on the house. 2 names, cut deep, over the front door under the golden scale. The Deepstone and Mori, in letters a foot high, because dragons and humans agree on one thing, which is that a thing worth building is worth carving. It is not a wedding, whatever the border towns say. There is no ceremony and no priest and no ring. There is a mountain that is hers, a house that is ours, and 40 years she mentioned once at a wheel and never took back. That is the whole of it. I came into this world in a cart, with a class the priests laughed at and a bag of wooden buttons, and I wanted exactly one thing, which was enough gold to buy a ticket home. There is no ticket. There never was. The summoning runs once a century, and I could sit and wait for 96 more years, and I have known for a long time that I am not going to. I do not have my way out, and I have stopped wanting one, and I am not sorry about that. A cook, a sergeant, a boy with a broken tooth, a red drake with a stump on his head, a gray woman who was right and made me admit it, and a continent which I own by accident and do not want and cannot give back, and it is the least interesting thing on the list. I still deal. Every night, the second table from the door, from dusk until the small hours. Not because the house needs me on the floor, because I want to be the one saying the price out loud when a player sits down, and I want my own hands on the cards. Wheel turns. The ball drops. Somebody wins, and I pay them in full within the hour. And somebody loses, and Ignis puts a hand on their shoulder at 500, and the doors open again at dusk tomorrow. And on a cold, clear night in the 5th year, in the middle of the 3rd spin of the evening, somebody knocks on the front door of the house, which is strange. Nobody knocks. The front of the house is open along its whole length, and there are 200 creatures in the ash outside it, and the door has not been shut since the night Kaldrek fell on it. Bran goes. He comes back with his face doing something I have not seen it do, and he says quietly that there are 7 of them, and that they are not dragons, and they are not human. They are tall, taller than me by 2 heads, silver-haired, in coats of gray cloth so fine it moves like water, and they have come across the sea, which nobody has ever done, in a ship nobody saw arrive. The one in front bows exactly as low as he thinks I am worth, which is not very, and says that he speaks for the high houses beyond the western water. He says they have heard that the ash keeps a house of games. He says his people live a very long time, longer than dragons, and that they have grown extremely tired. And then he says, "We are told there is a game here that is played with cards, in which the players lie to one another about what they hold, and in which the strongest hand does not always win." Silvara looks at me. Ignis, behind the 3rd table, lifts his head. 200 dragons in human shape go quiet all along the front of my hall. I put the ball down on the rim of the wheel. I get a fresh deck out from under the counter, and I break the seal on it with my thumb, and I pull out a chair, and I sit down at the 2nd table from the door. I say, "Please sit." It is called poker. The house takes a small slice of every pot. The slice is named out loud before a single card moves, and nobody in this room has ever once been lied to about the price.
This one is about a man who was handed the most useless thing in the world and stood there looking at it until he saw what it really was. Nobody rescued him. What kept him alive was small and dull and repeated every single night. He named the price out loud before anyone put anything down. He paid the winners in full, on the hour, even when it hurt. He wrote down what he owed the people who helped him, and he paid that too, where everybody could see it. And when an old woman asked him to set a limit on his own greed, he refused her, and then he was honest enough to go back and cut it into the wall. That is the lesson. The strongest person in any room is the one who can stop.